From the state's perspective, what are the sentencing options in this case?
Okay. I just wanted to correct the record, and then I'll be happy to answer. Ms. Reisminger indicated that there was 2 minimum mandatories involved in this case. There are 3. The jury found the defendant committed a attempted second-degree murder with a firearm with discharge causing great bodily harm on count 3. So the options that you have are as follows, and one of them is you don't have an option on it. You have you are going to be required to give the defendant at least 25 years in the Department of Corrections based on 775.087 sub 2, I think it's B. And you'll have discretion to decide whether or not to run those 3 minimum mandatories concurrently or consecutively. So that will be in your discretion. So if you run them consecutively, you can run some of them concurrent, some of them consecutive for 50 years, or you can run all 3 of them consecutively for a total of 75 years. Depending on what's presented by the defense, you may have discretion to sentence as low as 25 years if you find that there, by preponderance of the evidence, that there is a downward departure ground and it's appropriate from a sentencing standpoint to utilize that. So that may be available to you. Otherwise, the minimum sentence that you'd be able to sentence the defendant to under the guidelines would be the period of months that you just mentioned, which is 543 months or 45 and a quarter years. The discretion you would have would be to decide whether or not to sentence him from 45.25 years up to life, or whether or not to run the 2 murder sentences consecutive to each other, which would be consecutive. You could sentence him up to consecutive life or a term of years, depending. That would be in your discretion. And you would have available to you 30 years on count 3, since that's a first-degree felony, and you could impose that sentence either concurrently or consecutively as well. And I believe those are the sentencing options that you have in this case.
So you just mentioned 30 years on count 3.
That's correct. It's a first-degree felony based on the firearm enhancement under 765.087 sub 1.
Okay, so the minimum is 25 in the states?
Minimum is 25, maximum is 30 on that count.
All right. Yes, thank you. Does the defense agree with those sentencing options?
Essentially, yes. We believe that, again, depending on different rulings that the court will make in sentencing, the range is basically 25 years to life. There's a lot of different ways that could play out depending on the rulings today. And I agree with the state that it's discretionary on the court, and that anything below the 45, whatever it is, would depend on the court making written findings as to mitigating factors that would justify a downward departure.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, is there any lawful reason as to why we cannot proceed to sentencing and allow the state and defense to present their witnesses and evidence to support what they're requesting as far as a sentence?
Other than the grounds raised in the motion for a new trial and ruled upon by the court, without waiving any of those, there's no lawful reason not to proceed at this time.
Okay. State ready to proceed as well?
We're ready.
All right. Is there any objection to allowing the state to present their witnesses and evidence and then allowing the defense to follow with witnesses and evidence?
That's fine.
Okay. All right. How would the state like to proceed?
We have survivors and relatives of survivors that wish to present. I don't know, there's been a lot of letters that the court received in this case. I don't think that letters were received from these people, and so I wanted to let them address the court. I guess the first person is Jeanie Huppert.
My name is Jeanie Huppert, and I'm here today to tell you how the murder of my father, Gary Hembree, has affected me. September 3rd, 2012 was the day my whole life changed. I went from waking up to my dad every day and kissing him goodnight every night to never seeing him again. My dad had always been there for me, my brothers, and even strangers. He had so much love overflowing that he had enough to love my half-brother Alan and my brother's half-sister Caitlin. Kids that were not even his own, he treated as if they were. I had a bond with my dad that I could never have with anyone else, and it was taken away. I never had a fear in the world, but losing my dad has made me scared of a lot. He made the world seem so bright and happy. My dad protected me from a lot. When he died, I saw so many bad things instantly. Violence, crime, and drugs were all the three main things that he kept me from. When he died, I saw that stuff everywhere. I moved house to house, school to school, state to state, and guardian to guardian since he has died. I watched everyone in my family fall apart. There really wasn't much good happening for us once we lost my dad. I watched my mom go in and out of jail, and I watched my brothers hold everything in and have anger just burst out. I watched the whole family try to pick up the pieces, and it's just impossible. Since my dad was gone, I got bounced around, and I ended up being mentally and physically abused for 3.5 years. I have been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, severe anxiety, and separation anxiety. I have attempted suicide twice before I realized that I need to be alive to make sure that my dad is known for the good. So allow me to tell you about the Gary Hembree that was taken away. My dad always made sure everyone around him had what they needed and a smile. He was so funny and caring. He could be so sad, but if he saw you upset, he would do anything to make you happy and support you. He would do anything and everything to comfort someone. He was also like a big kid, made sure his priorities were straight, and then he was always playing games and telling jokes. Every night before I went to bed, whether I was with my dad or not, or on the phone with him, we said our prayers together. He was an amazing guy. I can't believe he is going to miss me learning how to drive, me going to high school, my first homecoming, my first prom, my first car, and my first job, and my first house. He will never meet my family I create. He will never be able to walk me down the aisle. It's horrible how much his death has already changed us and is going to change us more. I lost so much that day. I lost everything. I hope knowing the effect that this has had on me will help you make the right choice when sensitive the man who murdered my dad.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Sarah Marie Hembree.
All right, and I believe you have a statement that you'd like to present to the court.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you may proceed.
My name is Sarah Hembree, and I'm here to tell you the impact the murder of Gary Hembree has had on my life. I'm also asking that you have no leniency on William Woodward for the crime he is guilty of. Gary was my husband for just short of 10 years. We had 2 children together, Zachary and Cory. He and I purchased a home on 1950 Smith Drive in the summer of 2000. We split up shortly after, but Gary remained in the home. Him and I were still a team because we had our 2 sons to raise. In 1995, I met a gentle giant whose smile, sense of humor, and tender heart quickly won me over. I did not realize at the time just how much that gentle giant, Gary Lee Hembree, would change my life. One of those major changes came just a year and a half later when Zachary was born. The love I'd seen in Gary's eyes for his baby boy was indescribable. It made me love him so much more. He was a very helpful father, always spending as much time with Zach as he could when he wasn't working. A few years later, we had our second son, Cory. He had a pretty difficult delivery. Gary was so concerned and on top of the doctors making sure our baby was okay. It was one of the few times I'd ever seen him cry. After splitting up, we were still working together as best as possible to raise our boys. Gary was always there for his boys, and in ways that cannot be measured. He hugged and kissed his kids every day. He played with them like he was one of the kids while still being daddy. Every night they were with him. He said prayers before bed. He taught them right from wrong, and so much more. Gary Hembree was absolutely the best father. I couldn't have asked for a better dad for my kids. We both had daughters after splitting up, and he was so good to my daughter, Caitlin. He always showed her love and affection. And that's just a brief summary of how life was before Gary was shot over and over and over again on Labor Day 2012. The grief of losing Gary has been unbearable. My son Zachary was just 15 on the day that his father was taken from him. That day forever changed the direction of my son's life. Gary was planning to get Zach a vehicle for his 16th birthday, which was coming in the next few weeks. That was one of the first of many unfulfilled experiences Zach would have with his father. Cory was only 12 when Gary was murdered. Cory was especially close to his dad, and losing him was devastating. Gary also has a daughter that he had full custody of when he was killed. She was taken out of state. She was only 8 years old and turned 9 just a couple weeks after Gary was killed. The only life she'd known had just been destroyed. The kids' lives have been turned upside down, and one of the main people that shows them how to handle things in life has been violently ripped away. If losing their dad in that gruesome way they did wasn't enough, the murder was captured on video surveillance and quickly publicized. Everything that's happened because of this caused nothing but negative things. And as a parent, you want to protect your kids from all things painful, and my power to do so was also taken from me as quickly as he pulled the trigger. Over the last 5+ years, Gary's murder and all that's followed it has caused tremendous distraught for myself and my kids. We've had to pick up pieces and try to make sense of something that can never make sense. I've witnessed the huge rippling effect of horror that has occurred because of one man deciding that he has the right to take the life of another. The reality of the terror has created a lot of fear in myself and many of the ones I love who were also affected. My kids are my top priority, and they have suffered so much. I never want them to worry that they have to fear William Theodore Woodward again. Since Gary's murder, the home that Gary and I purchased together was foreclosed on and lost to the bank. The home that my kids grew up in and hold so many memories close to their heart from was tainted. Now it is a reminder that their dad was massacred there. There was definitely a material loss in the form of the house. None of that really matters in comparison to losing Gary. Both of our boys have had many firsts without their dad. Learning to drive, getting their licenses, high school dances, graduation, first jobs, etc. Gary and I became grandparents last year, and not having him to share this with has been so heart-wrenching. My granddaughter will never know the amazing person her grandfather was. Every single day, Gary is thought of or spoken of and dearly missed by all who knew and loved him. The immeasurable brokenness to so many people that the act alone has caused should be enough to see that a man like William Woodward, who is so quick to take a life, has no business living in society. This is why I'm asking that you give him the maximum punishment possible of life without parole. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, Lisa. If my memory serves me correctly, Billy Woodward is to be sentenced tomorrow. Unfortunately, I will be unable to attend. Barbara has been in and out of the hospital several times and is now back in. Her chemo wipes out her immune system, and then she comes down with severe infections requiring hospitalization. If you could please be so kind as to address the court for us. While it has been a long road, we hope that this is now coming to an end and justice will be served. The loss of a child, even one in his 40s, is a terrible loss to any parents. It has been especially hard on Roger's mother, as I'm sure it would be on any mother. I'm sure that Mr. Woodward never gave that a thought as he took those 2 lives and severely injured another. All we ask is that he receives a penalty that is deserving of his acts and all the families affected. Our thanks to the court, legal system, jury, and to Lisa DeAnda, who kept us informed during the entire process. Sincerely, Joseph L. Picor, father, Barbara Picor, mother, Joseph S. Picor, brother.
Bruce Timothy Blake.
All right, you had a statement to present to the court, sir?
Yeah, it's short.
You may proceed.
All right. The torment I will not explain. It speaks for itself. Laying on the ground looking at someone pump bullets at me is a constant flashback, but will never happen again. You made a permanent decision on a temporary emotion. You spent over 5 years trying to change that. I've handled what happened to me. Now you got to handle what happened to you. Giving the max.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Cory Henry.
And you have a statement to present to the court?
Yes.
You may proceed.
My name is Cory Henry, and I'm here to tell you the impact on my life due to the loss of my father, Gary Hembree. I had just turned 12 years old whenever I found out my father was murdered. He was the best dad that I could have asked for. I was only a few months old whenever I moved into the house that the murder took place. It was not just a house to me, that was my home. We liked the neighborhood and our friends. Everyone got along good with each other. My older brother is right when he says it seems funny. We lived there without any problems until the last few months when Kim and Roger and Bruce and his family moved next door. I think about it all the time trying to make sense of it. How a friend for years could be the person who killed my dad. I've always believed the real reason for the shooting was jealousy. Before the changes, the last couple of months, our family and Billy's family spent a lot of time with each other. But we started spending time with Kim's kids, Bruce's kids, and less time with Billy and his daughter. Even Dad was spending more time with the others. I've always believed Billy felt rejected and there was jealousy. I guess none of us will ever know. Even though money was tight, Dad did everything he could to make sure he had the best life that he could give us. Some things he gave us money can't buy. He would play basketball with us, jump on the trampoline with us, build skateboard ramps for our skateboards, took us fishing, went swimming in the pools, and there was just so much time together with him. He took us to Wet n Wild, and as you can tell, he was very involved in our lives. He was always there when we performed at school plays, and Dad would come to our award ceremonies. He made school was first before anything. He really wanted what was best for us. No one made us feel like we were number one like my dad. Anyone who knew Dad knew his kids were first in his life. And I miss the closeness. I miss him every night when I go to bed, no matter where we were. At bedtime, he would always say goodnight prayers with us. Even if we were at our mom's house on the weekend, he called at bedtime to say our prayers together. Even if he was on a mini vacation out of state, he called us and we said our prayers together. Dad was called the neighborhood dad because most of the kids played in our yard. Some of our friends didn't have parents like we had. Some worked, so Dad let them play in the yard because he not only loved his own kids, but he loved and cared about other kids too. Dad let our friends spend the night, and he would put up the tent. He would be right there with us having fun. My last birthday, with my dad, he told me he was going to take me to a concert because I'd never been to a real live concert. But the day of my birthday, we were on the way to the concert, and he said he made the wrong turn. But he was really surprising me. He took me on my first deep sea fishing trip We had a blast. We fished for 8 or 9 hours, catching all kinds of fish. That was one of the best birthdays I have ever had, but I didn't know it would be the last birthday I would spend with my dad. Since then, every year I would go deep sea fishing on the same boat that my dad took me on for my last birthday. I was staying the weekend at my mom's house of the shooting. It was a 3-day weekend due to Labor Day. The last time I saw my dad was 2 days before he was taken from us. I stopped by our house to get money from him because I was going to the bowling alley. The last words I said to each other was, "I love you, and I will see you Monday night." There was no way I would know that my dad would have been brutally murdered, and I would never see him again. I was at my mom's house when I found out about Dad. I was sleeping. I woke up and saw a lot of people in the house crying, but I didn't know what happened. My mom was in my room. She sat down next to me and told me there was a shooting at my house and that my dad didn't make it. I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I heard. So many things were running through my head. My mind, I couldn't deal with it. I bursted into tears. I was 12 and I just got told that I just lost my dad. I lost my world. The man that killed my dad took my life away from me. I went back to school a few days later not knowing how bad it would be. Everyone saying that they were sorry about Dad. Some people would say Dad was in a better place, which didn't make any sense at the time to me, that he was in a better place. If he had cancer and was suffering, maybe he would be in a better place, but he was taken from us. That is not being in a better place. Me and my brother were pallbearers for Dad. It was our last thing we could do for Dad, but it was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. I can't describe what it was like while carrying my dad in a coffin to be put in the ground. While we were at Dad's memorial after the funeral, Destiny was taken from us by her grandmother in New York, who she had never met. If Dad had been murdered, if Dad wouldn't have been murdered, Destiny wouldn't have been away from her family. We weren't rich, but we always had our family together. It was like all these people who were not even a part of our life stepped in and took over. And I walked past Billy's daughter every day in the hallway at school. It hurts knowing so bad that the guy that we lived next door my whole life is the one that killed my dad. I had played at their house with his daughter, not knowing at the time that I was in the house of the one who would kill my dad. And he ruined my life. Seeing her in school gave me confusion feelings because we all had been friends for years, but her dad killed my dad. I always said he shouldn't be allowed to see his kids because we will never get to see our dad. I didn't have my dad there to see me get my license, to get my first car, to see me go to my first homecoming. My dad will never be able to see me grow into the man he raised me to be. Dad never saw his first grandchild being born or being able to experience being a grandfather. He took everything away from me. I had to grow up way too fast. I missed out on a lot of my childhood. Even years later in the high school, on my first day of school, his daughter was in my first class sitting right behind me. And it was a constant reminder of her dad killed my dad, even though I knew she didn't do it. The anger and the lack of trust followed me all the time. When I was going to my first homecoming dance, I was mad that my dad couldn't be there to teach me how to tie a tie and smile, and then tell me how proud he was of me while he would have been taking pictures. When I passed my driver's license test, I thought about Dad and how he would be as excited as I was when I passed the test. Our first Christmas, 3 months after he was killed, was nothing like our other Christmas together. Dad was always so funny at Christmas, making us laugh while he took pictures, but no one in the family was happy. We were just trying to do what we did every year, but it was not the same without Dad. My family says if a lot since Dad was killed. If Dad hadn't come out of the house to see what the noises was that night when he heard the gunshots, if Dad didn't have the coffee cup in his hand, if after he was already shot and he hadn't yelled for the kids to run, could he still be alive? My life was impacted from the day Dad was murdered to having to move from my home and my neighborhood where I lived my whole life, to not being close to people because of lack of trust. If a friend can shoot another friend, who can you trust? When I walk out of this courthouse, the legal team moves on to another case, but I moved through the rest of my life without my dad. I hope you, the judge, I hope you judge my dad as an individual today, as he was not a gang member, which they claimed, and give him the sentence of life without parole.
Thank you, sir.
Dorothy Jean Huppert.
You may proceed. I understand you have a statement to present.
Yes. Gary Hembree is my only son, who is forever 39 years old. When he was born, he was exactly what I wanted, a brown-eyed boy. As Gary grew up, he became quite a mommy's boy. And he was such a cutie with those big brown eyes and brown hair. Gary was a happy son, and rarely did you see him without a smile on his face. He loved life, and anyone who knew him saw it through Gary's laughter, smile, sense of humor, and willingness to be there when he was needed. Gary was always a loving and affectionate person. He had never been in a fight. All through school, like you've seen in other boys he's at his age, he was more the peacemaker trying to resolve issues. Gary was a simple man. He never wanted brand name clothing because material things really didn't impress him. He was just as happy with a used bike as he would have been with a new one. A friend of mine described Gary one day saying Gary didn't have the best of everything, but he made the best of everything he had. When Gary became a father to his oldest son, Zach, I think I was prouder of him than I had ever been, because he was one of the best fathers I had known. I always bragged to him how proud I was of him as a father, and he said to me one day, he never wanted his own children to ever feel unloved or unwanted like he felt from his biological father. Thankfully for Gary, he had my husband Willie there for him as a role model from the time he was 3 years old. Gary adored his children, and we were in the delivery room when all three of them were born. At the time of the shooting, Gary had primary custody of his children, and he didn't want it any other way. He had the role of a mom and dad in their home, cooking, cleaning, doing housework, laundry, and attending school events. I am unable to put in words the bond I have with my son, because I don't know another mother and son relationship like we had. And after he was murdered, that bond was severed. Many people have told me there's no way they could ever talk about personal things with their mothers like Gary did with me. One day I pulled at his driveway to visit, and he had 3 male friends talking to him in the yard. When I walked up to him, he said, "This is my me-other," which was my nickname from Gary. I laughed at him and I asked him, "Why don't you call me Mom like your friends called their mother?" And he said, "Because you are my other." I could call him for anything, and he was there to help me. Shortly after Gary was murdered, Willie and I bought a frame for Gary's swing, and Willie said he would put the frame together after the weekend. And the first thing that I thought of was, I'll call Gary and Roger in the morning, and they'll put it together tomorrow. And then it hit me. Gary and Roger are no longer with us. I miss so many personal things Gary did. Periodically, out of nowhere, I would receive a text from Gary telling me he was thinking about me and how much he loved and appreciated having me for his me-other. He would also do the same on Facebook page, not denying his feelings for me or to his friends. Sometimes Gary would call, and when I answered the phone, On the other end, he would start singing, I just called to say I love you. And to this day, I cry when I hear that song. At midnight on New Year's Eve, Gary was the first to call to wish me a Happy New Year. The last time I saw Gary was a few days before he was murdered. He called me on the phone and told me that Billy said he was going to wait until they all went to sleep and he was going to go in the house and kill all of them, including the kids and dogs. I really didn't believe he would do it, and it was just a threat, but I took Gary a can of mace for protection. Gary asked what good that was going to do. And I explained, I don't really think he's going to carry out the threat, but the mace could give you time to call the police. As always, when I was leaving, Gary hugged me and we said, I love you to each other. This was something Gary did any time he left him. He was different, unlike a lot of men. Gary was never shy about expressing his feelings and saying, I love you. The night of September the 2nd, 2012, I was in bed sleeping peacefully. My husband Willie turned on the overhead light and he pulled off the bed linens for me. I woke up asking him what he was doing, and he sat on the side of the bed and said, Jean, there's no easy way to tell you this, but Gary's been shot. I tried to hurry and get dressed to get to the hospital, but Willie had his arms around me, holding me back. Willie hugged me and said, Jean, he's gone. The first thing that went through my mind was, oh my God, he really killed him. I learned later it was Justin's mother who came to the house and told Willie Gary had been killed, and Willie said to her, oh my God, how in the world am I going to tell his mother? I can't explain what happened to me when I got out of bed, but as a retired nurse, I would have to say I went into shock. But as a mother, I started taking care of things that needed to be done. I began notifying the family and friends, and at one point looked at the television set and saw Gary's house on the news. I saw all the police lights, the CSI, other EMS. But even though I saw it on the television, I continued making the phone calls. Months later, I didn't remember notifying them until I would ask, how did you find out about the shooting? And they would say, you called me. I remember the following days, the coroner calling me several times asking about Gary. I remember one day I said that I heard Gary was not only shot once, but he had been shot twice. He paused for a few minutes and then he said the autopsy report hadn't been finished. Another time the coroner and I told him I heard Gary had been shot. I told the coroner I heard Gary had been shot 6 times, and I begged him, please just tell me the truth. Again, I received the same answer with the addition that they had to count entry and exit wounds. I could not believe this conversation were about my son. I was having a hard time comprehending the words from the coroner, let alone the terms being used, such as entry and exit wounds. Willie and I had to go make funeral arrangements for Gary, and I remember completing the paperwork that was told we would go in another room to select a coffin. A coffin? For my Gary, a coffin? I cried and Willie comforted me as we walked in the room. We were being shown different ones and told the prices of each one, while I was staring in disbelief that this was real and we were going to bury our son. Willie told him not to tell me the prices because Gary was a good man, a good father, and a good son, and whatever I wanted, I could have. From there we had to go to the cemetery to select a gravesite. We were on the golf cart when the lady handed us a sheet of paper. My mind was in a foggy state, and I started looking at it, and she said it was the price list. Again, Willie grabbed the paper from me and told her not to tell me the prices. How do you pick out a grave for your son? I was not doing very well, and at one point Willie said, Gene, what about the peace garden? Gary is at peace now. I let him make the decision since he raised Gary. And besides, at this point, I was in denial because I still couldn't or wouldn't accept we were going to bury Gary. Gary had no life insurance, and we were told arrangements for the services could be made until it was paid in full. The thought of my son being left in a drawer in the funeral home and not properly buried him, Willie and I are so upset. We didn't have that kind of money available that day, but Willie told him he'd get the money from his 401k retirement plan. That it may take a few days or weeks. And as we were leaving the funeral home, I asked if I could kiss Gary goodbye because I had never left him without a kiss and an I love you. He advised against it. By that time, I believe we had been told he had been shot 15 times, and he had 29 entry and exit wounds. I explained I didn't want to see his body, I only wanted to kiss him on his forehead. He said, no, you don't. It would cause psychological damage for the rest of your life, but I promise I will get lots of hair, lots of Gary's hair from you and his children. Within hours after we left, the funeral home director informed me Gary's biological father and his 2 daughters from Ohio and other people were there and insisted on seeing Gary's body. I asked him to explain to them what he had said to me and Willie, and he said he did try, but they insisted, so he made them sign a waiver so they didn't hold the funeral home responsible. I learned later from Gary's oldest son, who was 15 years old, they showed him the pictures they had taken of Gary's body. We charged the funeral home and the graveside on a credit card until Willie got the money from his 401k. Gary had a closed coffin, closed services due to conditions of his body from being shot 15 times. Watching Gary's 2 sons, my brothers, Gary's cousin and Chris and Andrew, Gary's nephews carrying Gary's coffin to the graveside was nearly unbearable to see, let alone knowing our son was inside that coffin. Christmas was coming up, and I told Andrew many times, I am not having Christmas. It would never be the same without Gary. And Andrew said, oh, yes, you are, Dad. Gary's kids have been through enough, and we need something normal in our lives. We always spent Christmas Eve at Nana and Pop-Pop's house, and we are having Christmas with them. We had our Christmas celebration, but most of the wanted gifts was all about Gary, except for Andrew trying to break the ice by proposing to his high school sweetheart, Sammy. I don't remember the date, but shortly after the burial, I thought I was going to lose my husband. He was exhibiting signs of a heart attack and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. He was in ICU overnight. Willie is a private person, and he was hiding his feelings. He was under a tremendous amount of stress and grief, not only due to the loss of Gary, but watching all of us grieve and him feeling so helpless. Gary's 8-year-old daughter, Destiny, was taken from us not once, but twice. The first time was while we were having the memorial service at Fox Lake after we left the cemetery. It was like another death, losing my granddaughter. She was taken out of state and away from her family. We got her home again, but she was taken away from us again. Both times she was in a home with people she didn't even know. The last time she was being mentally and physically abused, and she attempted suicide. She was told repeatedly it was her fault her dad was dead. I filed for custody, and we brought Destiny home to her family in May of 2017. Willie and I came close to getting a divorce about 3 years after losing Gary. I didn't care if I lived or died. I felt I had nothing to offer Willie, and he deserved more than I had to give. I had always been the person in the family to solve problems, but I couldn't solve this for any of us. I was feeling so helpless. I felt as though I was on a stationary horse on a merry-go-round, watching everyone around me going on with their lives while I was not moving. I tried putting on a smile for everybody, but I was dying inside without my son. I cried every night for 3 years and 4 months. When I went to bed, the room where I was told the worst news of my life, that my son had been murdered. Gary did not die. He had been murdered. His life was taken from us. Every night when I went to bed, I relived that night. When Willie told me about Gary being murdered, I hated that bedroom and I hate it now. I don't believe in God anymore. Gary and Roger were saved just 2 weeks before they were gunned down in the darkness of the night. Where was God that night? Where was God when I cried every night praying for help? Where was God when Gary's daughter was taken from her family and being abused and blamed for years, and it was her fault her dad was killed? My favorite holiday before Gary was murdered was the 4th of July. I was one of the most patriotic people you would ever meet. When I even think of the 4th of July, I see my son's killer in his army t-shirt sitting across the street from Gary's house, giving him the finger while threatening to kill him. Our family usually spent the 4th of July locally at Sandpoint Park. Gary wore his patriotic red, white, blue top hat, laughing with everyone, while being a kid at heart watching the firework displays. The 4th of July without Gary has never been the same, nor has Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, or our family birthday parties. Gary's memories remain with us every day. When Andrew and Sammy were married in 2015, they even had a remembrance for Gary on their table because Gary would have been there. Andrew and Sammy arranged for the family photos for us for a Christmas gift in 2017. I cried thinking we couldn't have a family photo without Gary. And they came up with the idea to have a picture of Gary in the frame, and we would hold Gary's picture while the family photo was being taken. Since Gary was murdered, I am very cautious about where I go. I always have been taught by my mother to keep our business locally, which I do try to do, yet I'm constantly looking over my shoulders wherever I go to eat or go to local events because of the shooter's family members staring and smiling at me and my family as though he was happy about what was done to our family. It had gotten so bad I reported it, but then was told there was no law against smiling at others. It did stop after I reported it to his job. Even when I go out in public, many things trigger inside of me. Even when I go out in public, many things trigger inside of me that places me back to the murder of Gary. Driving to all of the docket soundings and court hearings, the past 5.5 years, we passed a Chick-fil-A billboard, and I can still remember seeing the video of the shooter complaining during the confession about losing his background chickens when he had just killed our son. I was in a hardware store and overheard a customer asking where to find the duct tape. My mind went back to remembering the shooter accusing my granddaughter of stealing a roll of duct tape when she wasn't even at home. One day, I asked one of my grandkids to pick up the pieces to a game, and he said, "Man," and I did. I got them all. I actually started crying as I would leave the video, the shooter proudly yelling, "I got them all." He appeared so proud, not at all remorseful. For over 5 years, I've followed all of the appeals calling, frequently checking online the status from the appeals in the 5th District State of Appeals to the Supreme Court. I have marched in Tallahassee regarding the standard law, ground law. I have been an advocate for gun reform laws to protect others from losing loved ones to gun violence. I have made thousands of photos for other grieving mothers who walk this journey too. Each of us mothers will never, ever have another picture of our son. When I receive a picture of Gary that I had never seen, It makes me so happy. It's almost an irreplaceable gift. Only those walking this journey truly understand the loss of losing a child, let alone one taken by gun violence. A mother should never have to bury their child. In 2017, we got Destiny home for the first time, and I felt like having Christmas, but I couldn't find my Christmas ornaments. And after looking everywhere, I asked, and Andrew and Sammy said they thought I threw them away because I said I would never celebrate Christmas again without Gary. I don't remember doing that, but the ornaments cannot be found. I have lost 2 sisters and 2 brothers before they reached 19 years old due to accidental death. I lost my mother after she battled 3 types of cancer in 4 years, and my father, who had a heart attack at the age 54. I am not new to death, but I am new to murder in the family. I am new to losing my only son after being slaughtered during a sneak attack in the darkness of the night. My husband said that is not murder, that's a massacre. I am new to the lies being told about our son. I am new to reading comments on news articles calling my son a thug, saying he was part of a gang, a drug addict, and other names. I am new to seeing my grandchildren upset after driving in their own neighborhood and seeing signs posted in 4 of the neighbors' yards, support Billy Woodward when he killed their father. If the truth was known, anyone who knew Gary knew he was the most loving, caring, sensitive, and giving person you would ever meet. He was a man who loved his family and was there for them when he was needed. And it didn't stop with just the family. Some of his neighbors told me how Gary helped them and wouldn't take any money from them, saying, I don't charge my neighbors. Gary loved living, and rarely did you see him without a smile. He had a sense of humor and loved making others laugh. Gary was a protector of his family. I am new to watching my grandchildren go through milestones in their life without their dad. Gary's 2 sons passed their driver's license test, got their first new vehicles. Zach becoming a father himself. At each of those events, they talked about how Gary should have been there during those events. After the Stand Your Ground trial, Cory texted me around midnight, and I asked him why was he still awake. He said he was watching videos on how to give an impact statement. I cried thinking my 15-year-old grandson should not be worried about giving an impact statement. But going through it myself, I knew he was unable to sleep because his dad was on his mind. I am sure the family of the defendant can say some of these events I have described are being experienced by them too, but in my opinion, there is a difference. Gary was in his house, on his property, while the defendant was crawling like a snake for nearly a half an hour, dressed in camouflage clothing, carrying a 9mm gun with an extra clip before firing 31 bullets, killing 2 fathers and severely injuring a 3rd father. I would trade places any day with the defendant's family, even if it's only to talk to Gary on the phone or see him behind bars as they have for the last 5.5 years. I often hear, Your Honor, guns don't kill people. The person behind the gun kills people. Today, one of those people awaits your decision, just as Gary's family has awaited all these years. I have never seen any remorse from the person responsible for taking my son's life. He has never shown any accountability for his actions, for the pain, the heartache, and the destruction he has done to my family. I hope he never sees freedom again to ever do this to another family. And I believe with all my heart that he would. I ask for the maximum sentence allowed to give justice for this horrific crime and judge each of the 3 affected by this gun violence individually and give the final sentence as consecutively. I have been told we are finally going to receive justice after 5 years, 7 months, 1 week and a day, you can give justice for this crime, but nothing or no one on this earth can give justice for taking Gary away from our family. Our lives have been forever changed due to that sneak attack in the darkness of the night when one person planned to shoot 3 unarmed men when they didn't have a chance to escape. One man destroyed many families, including his own, and he needs to be held accountable for his actions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, ma'am.
Her name is Christina Cipollone. She's the sister. I never imagined violence would roar in on our family, destroying our world. It came to a complete stop. The comfortable, peaceful, safe life we had lived came to an abrupt stop. There are really no words to describe the feeling of going to bed at night believing everything is all right in your world, then waking up to find your world as you knew it is forever gone. This senseless, unbearable act took our personalities from my family. We will never understand the brutality that befell upon Gary Hembree, my brother. This act has torn family members apart. The pain we have had to endure just trying to have the strength to even talk, trying to make it through another day. We was led to a room with a cold table where my handsome brother lay. This time when I looked at my brother, he wasn't the handsome, flawless-looking brother I grew up with. His skin was no longer soft, it was cold and full of bullet holes. 29 entry and exit holes in my beloved brother. I've tried to find words to tell you how Gary's murder has impacted my life, but there are no adequate words to describe the pain, anger, and despair that I felt from his murder. He took so much from us. It took my security and my children's innocent outlook on the world. It took my rest and peace. I have lost my faith and trust in people. I don't want to be outside if my neighbors are out. I don't want to go to friends' houses just in case they have an angry neighbor ready to snap. I have trouble finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. Being happy doesn't seem right anymore. Sometimes the feeling of despair becomes so overwhelming, so oppressive, that it literally takes my breath away. I never know what sound or what sight is going to trigger in my mind a memory. And while my memories of Gary, my brother, are so sweet, with them comes the realization that he is gone. And each time that realization hits my heart, it is devastating. Gary was a loving, giving young man with a heart as big as the world. His murder took a father, son, brother, grandson, nephew, cousin, and friend who was greatly loved by many. My brother Gary and I had a relationship that will never be duplicated. Gary enjoyed life and enjoyed living life. He enjoyed his kids most of all, his family, friends, fishing, camping, concerts. Oh, how my brother loved music. Gary just started a good job at NASA that he was enjoying very much. He wanted to save money and move back home to Ohio. His life was finally starting to come together in the direction he wanted and had hoped for. Gary will never get to see his 3 kids graduate from school, get married, or see his grandchildren. All 9 of his nephews will never get to play games with him again, see him on special occasions, or have him watch them at another football game again. What the future would have held for my brother Gary is unknown. He may never have made a bigger impact on this world that he had at the time of his murder. That we will never know. But to the people who knew and loved Gary, the impact he made on our lives is immeasurable. And we cry out injustice caused by this so-called man, William Woodward. What has kept me focused since Gary's murder, my beloved brother, is the promise I made to him when I saw my brother for the last time on the hard, cold table at the funeral home. I promised my brother Gary that William Woodward would pay, and now I pass that promise on to you. It is up to the court to decide William Woodward's sentence, and although there will never be justice for Gary, we are not seeking revenge in any way. Gary can never be brought back to us. We will never awake from this nightmare. I beg of the court for Gary's sake, for us, for his family, to give William Woodward the same leniency that he gave my brother, death. Gary got the death penalty with no trial of any kind. Christina Cipollone.
Tanya Del Santos.
And I understand that you have a statement to present?
Yes, ma'am.
You may proceed.
Today I'm supposed to tell you about the loss of Roger and how it's affected my life. This is very difficult to do when literally everything in our lives have changed. Roger blessed me with a son. We named him Justin. Over the years, Roger and I grew apart, but we always shared the love of our son. Before Roger was taken from us that terrifying night, I was happy, outgoing, and loving. I was a student my last semester in the medical assistant program at BCC. I was also a Sunday school teacher for children at New Life Christian Fellowship. After experiencing such a loss and witnessing my son's pain, all that is over. I am now full of grief, anger, fear, sadness, and anxiety. I have suffered financially, and my education is now in a distance. My daughter, who was 4 at the time, has been affected tremendously due to my shock and grief, causing her to have severe separation anxiety. However, to witness what our son has gone through is more painful than anyone could ever understand. At times, it feels almost unbearable. Justin's fear of people and anxiety are so extreme that he doesn't feel capable of reading his impact statement today. I can tell you as his mom that everything has changed in every possible way. Justin has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Justin's behavior is full of anxiety. He gives anyone wearing camouflage a second look, full of fear because of what he experienced at Labor Day night. He has difficulty concentrating, causing him to quit school. He has become withdrawn from his friends and family, hobbies, and anything he used to enjoy. The only thing he hangs on to is fishing, a sport that he and Roger enjoy together. He now experiences nightmares reliving that night, those sounds, the gunshots, and the screams. He is depressed and so full of anxiety he will not go anywhere alone. At the age of 23, he still lives at home, unable to move on, always in fear for his own life. Either his emotions are amplified, or as you witnessed, there was no emotion even while reliving the death of his father and lifelong friend in front of him. Justin was a teenager, only 17 when his dad was taken from us, losing his childhood. He is still afraid of loud noises and holidays such as the 4th of July, Labor Day weekend, and New Year's Eve. He has lost jobs due to loud noises, startling him back into flashbacks. Without Roger, neither Justin nor I can shout Justin's milestones such as getting his driver's license, his first car, holidays, and birthdays. Justin just spent his 6th birthday last week without his father. There are too many things to list that Roger, myself, and Justin have missed out on because of that horrible night. Through all this, I am blessed to still have my son. His life was spared during the rampage. However, the loss of Roger's life can never be returned to Justin and I. The last words he will remember are those played over and over for him to be listened to instead of "I love you." The images of his father are incomprehensible. Being put to death in a very inhumane way, gauze in his nose holding back the blood, and on life support. These last memories of his father are so traumatic that it will be with him forever. I pray today that Woodward be sentenced to the 3 life sentences consecutively. The thought of the man who pointed a gun at my son's head would be released in the same town that we live in is terrifying to us. With him in prison, we can try to get our lives back and try to get at least a new normal life, as they say. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sherry Hembree.
Just one
Sorry,
moment.
I'm still considering an objection to a portion of this. Yes, at this point in time, I would object to paragraph on page 1, the last 2 paragraphs, and portion of the first paragraph on page 2 being considered.
What is the basis of the objection?
Basically, it's diagnosis. She's not Justin testifying toward his own diagnosis. It's someone else talking about a diagnosis which hasn't been established otherwise in the record.
State's response?
This is a mother observing her son, who she says lives with them. She's expressing what not only she's going through, but what she's observing in her son. I think it's appropriate.
Actually, I think she's claiming that he lives at home.
All right, I will overrule the objection and introduce the entire statement as states number 8. Please state your name.
Gary Hembree.
I understand you have a statement to present.
Yes, ma'am.
You may proceed when you're ready.
I am Gary Hembree, and today I am here to talk to you about how the murder of Gary Lee Hembree has affected my life. First, I would like to say that Gary and I had the same mom and dad. Since Gary's murder, I see neither of them. Gary was not only my brother, he was my only full-blooded sibling and my dad's only male child. Gary was violently taken from us before his time. I love and miss my brother. He will always be in my heart and my soul. I haven't celebrated a holiday or had a family Christmas since the day Gary's murder. The added stress on my life has caused me to gain over 100 pounds. I don't tell anyone where I live or give out my phone number like I did when Gary was living. The death of my brother has created a trust issue within me. I used to go out and sing, write poetry for songs, and now I have a guitar case full of empty poetry that I can't bring myself to sing. I am glad I have friendly neighbors, and I pray to God that I never have neighbors like my brother had. I have been inside the house for almost 6 years and seldom leave. I only go out when I have to because I'm afraid that Mr. Woodward's family or friends might try to murder me. Mr. Woodward said I got them all, but because I am only Gary's only full-blooded sister, I feel like that his statement is a threat to me. I am still living, and he did not get them all. I have never owned a gun, but I think maybe the police and the military should work harder on not allowing people like Mr. Woodward to possess guns. Mr. Woodward said his dad loaned him the gun. I would like to know what psychologist or anyone else would let a person who has post-traumatic stress disorder near a gun, let alone have one. Because my brother was unarmed and was brutally murdered, I imagine what others go through in these situations. And I will encourage the government representatives, our education system, and our president to enact the death penalty for shootings and to create stricter gun laws. All of my life it has been Sherry and Gary. Mr. Woodward has taken that away from me. And yet, after Gary's murder, I called the fire department to ask them not to hold the actions of Mr. Woodward against his brother. This being that Mr. Woodward took lives and his brother saves them. During the stand your ground hearing, Mr. Woodward stated that his dad gave him the gun and told him, "I won't always be around. Do what you have to do," according to his own statement in court and in the news. I want to know what kind of parent gives this advice. What kind of parent gives their son a gun? What kind of family, besides a dysfunctional one, does this? Mr. Woodward has changed my view of the military in many ways. I have always supported our deployed troops in Iraq and Afghanistan and Korea by sending care packages to them. Some of the care packages included letters from children from local schools at Christmas. I have never seen the United States military take someone's only male child or brother like Mr. Woodward took mine. In my opinion,
Your actions are a disgrace to the United States military. In the Holy Bible, Leviticus 24:17 states, "And he that killeth a man shall surely be put to death." In the event of a sentence of death, my wish is that Mr. Woodward be given the chance to repent by being baptized before he is sent to meet his Maker. In the event of a lifetime sentence, my wishes are the same. I feel that no one should have to have their soul burn in eternal fire, and everyone should have the chance to be saved. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Jennifer Montgomery. I am the mother of Destiny and Jean. Gary Hembree is one and only daughter of the Hembree side family.
Okay.
Also,
Before you proceed further, ma'am, let me ask you to please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And please state your full name again.
Jennifer Lee Montgomery.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were also going to make a further statement.
Yes, when me and Gary originally started dating, I had a 2.5-year-old son, Alan Garrett Stockbridge, that Gary raised from that age on, and pretty much treated him like his own son on top of our own daughter, and as well as after in court. And he was the best father that I've ever met in my life. And they called him the daddy daycare, and I worked and he stayed at the house with the kids and all that, and take somebody's life like that and destroy these children's lives like they have. This is a tragedy for life. My kids and these babies will be affected for the rest of their life, on top of the trauma that it's done to us adults ourselves and the parents and so on. I just don't understand how somebody human could take somebody else's life like that and to do it so violently. It's just torture and the pain that I have. I'm supposed to fix everything as a parent, and I can never ever fix this. I can never ever give it back to their father. And I don't feel it's fair that this man can even see his children when my children will never ever see their father again in their life. And it's just devastating. Please, just let this man suffer for the rest of his life for life, and understand what he's done to these people. It's just, I can't even talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. State have any other witnesses or evidence to present for purposes of the sentencing?
No.
So the state would rest, other than argument?
Correct.
Okay.
We call Dr. Eric Mings.
Eric Mings, M-I-N-G-S.
Thank you. You may inquire.
Thank you. Dr. Mings, could you just give us a brief history of your training and qualifications?
Sure. I'm a psychologist. I've been licensed since 1988 in the state of Florida. I was trained as a neuropsychologist initially in graduate school, and I always had an interest in forensic psychology, so I began training in that during my internship when I was at North Florida Evaluation Treatment Center while I was doing an internship at the VA. So part of my internship was at the VA, primarily treating patients with PTSD, and part of my internship was at the state hospital. I worked as the first psychologist in ORMC's Brain Injury Rehab Center for about a little over a year and a half while I established private practice, and then I have been in private practice ever since then. I do forensic psychology on a full-time basis and have for many years.
And at my request, did you interview the defendant in this case, Mr. William Woodward?
Yes, I saw him on December 20th, 2017. The request at that point in time was for issues of competency to proceed.
And have you also reviewed some medical records, police reports, things of that nature in preparation of your testimony today?
Correct. I had some of the police reports available then. I just recently, within the past 24 hours, got some additional medical records from the Veterans Administration, the jail medical records, and some hospital records from Japan when he had suffered a traumatic brain injury.
As a result of the review of those materials in your interview with Mr. Woodward, have you reached any opinions as to the, reached any opinions as to the issue of whether or not Mr. Woodward suffers from any sort of mental and or physical injury deficit that would require specialized treatment?
He has clearly documented history of 2 conditions through the VA and has apparently received treatment for many years for those conditions. He is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and he is also diagnosed with what is called an organic affective disorder. What that means is a mood disorder secondary to brain injury. He has been treated with a variety of different mood stabilizing, anti-anxiety medications, and even antipsychotic medications through the VA. I had those records available. I also had records from his traumatic brain injury, which happened when he was 19 years of age and had a fall from a 4-meter high veranda. He was unconscious. He suffered a skull fracture. He subsequently developed a bacterial meningitis, and he was in total hospitalized for about 3 months as a result of that injury. So he has a traumatic brain injury. He has documented post-traumatic stress disorder, and he has documented what they call an organic affective disorder, which means a mood disorder secondary to brain injury.
And all of those injuries / disability to mental health issues, are they conditions which need specialized treatment?
Yeah, they do. They need specialized medication and counseling, and he was receiving that through the VA on an outpatient basis before this happened.
And based on the history and the records that you reviewed, do you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Woodward is amenable to treatment?
Well, I have every reason to believe so, and the basis of that is simply that he, by the records that I saw, he was compliant with care through the VA system. He was actively involved in treatment all the way up to the last note I had was August 21st, 2012, just before this incident happened. And then the jail medical records also indicated that he was compliant with care in the jail, so I have reason to believe that he is amenable to treatment.
And Doctor, in terms of his conditions, do you have an opinion as to whether or not those conditions could affect his ability to appreciate the criminality of his conduct and adjust his conduct to
constraints of the law?
Constraints of the law. Thank you.
Yes, I believe it could substantially impact that. The reason being that if you look at the notes from the VA, they talk about chronic problems with extreme anxiety, disinhibition of mood, that means unstable mood, feelings of aggression, and other issues similar to what apparently happened here. So I believe, looking at the records, that most of this originated from a combination of the brain injury when he was 19 years old and then the PTSD as a result of being in combat situations while in the service. He describes in the notes his feelings of anxiety, panic, anger, and similar kinds of experiences that are consistent with what apparently happened here.
And just prior to this injury, this particular incident, had he expressed through his treating physician at the VA concerns about safety for his family and how he may react in that situation?
Yes, he apparently had talked to them on several occasions. The most recent note that I had in terms of time frame of the incident was by his psychiatrist dated August 21st, 2012. And in part, the report that he gives to the psychiatrist is, I feel like I'm back in combat, high anxiety and panic, periods of inner anger. He is aggravated by neighbors' bad behavior still and discussed his coping strategies. They talked to him about that during the session, to which he responded that, well, let me find that. He indicated that he would only act violently if protecting his family from aggressive actions, is what he told the psychiatrist then. But he's talking at that point in time, just before this incident, about the anxiety, the panic, the anger problems that he's having at that point in time during the discussions with his psychiatrist.
Someone who suffers from Mr. Woodward's conditions, are they more susceptible to provocation than people who don't have those problems?
Well, I would say yes, because they're, number one, he's been in a combat situation, but number two, he's got a psychiatric condition that is dominated by unstable mood and disinhibition. That would make him more susceptible to provocation by other people because of the mental illness issues.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not he was able to cope or properly cope with his perceived failure of law enforcement, the judicial system, etc., to deal with this issue when he complained about it, and his reaction to that?
Well, to be clear, when I talked to him, my focus was specifically on competency to proceed. So I did not go into detail about what he did or did not do in this incident, nor did I go into detail about what led up to the incident, because that was beyond the scope of what I was doing. I know that reading the discovery records that he makes those statements to officers about his frustration regarding those issues, but I did not talk to him about it directly.
Okay. Well, based on your review of those materials and things like that, do you have an opinion just in terms of someone suffering from his conditions, whether or not his coping mechanisms were adequate?
Well, I believe that he was being treated because of problems with his psychiatric condition, his mental instability.
You may.
Doctor, if you could you flesh out a little bit more? You were talking about his organic brain injury. Mm-hmm. Could you explain to the court how that affects someone's impulse control and things of those nature?
Yes. Depending upon the nature of the injury, you can get different kinds of symptoms. What he described to me before I had all of these records available, just sort of in plain English, when I talked to him originally, was that he felt that he went from being an introverted person to being an extroverted person. And he also felt that he had much more difficulty with control of his emotions and anger. That's often found in traumatic brain injury. That's the kind of symptoms that the VA records show that he was being treated for, which is basically very high anxiety, disinhibited mood, what's called labile mood, meaning that he gets angry real easy, may become anxious real easy, and all of those other sort of things, which the VA, in their records, by their diagnosis, attributed to the brain injury. So I've been a neuropsychologist all of my career, and I've seen this kind of problem in people with traumatic brain injuries many times before, and it's not a surprise to me. So he was actively being treated for the emotional manifestations of traumatic brain injury when he was late adolescent while in the service.
All right. Thank you very much. Nothing more at this time.
Cross-examination?
Yes. What leads you to believe he was in a combat situation? Let's start there.
Well, he told me that he was in Saudi Arabia, in a combat zone in Saudi Arabia. I didn't go into great detail with him. The PTSD diagnosis from me comes directly from the VA, not my own assessment.
Not debated. So you relied on what he told you about combat. Were you aware that he was not in combat?
I don't know.
Judge, I'm going to object to the question because of the state's evidence. It really depends on what you define as combat.
Well, what do
he
you
was in
define
a
as
situation
combat?
where he was subjected to bombing while in the military.
Okay, Mr. Westbus, you're going to rephrase your question?
Yeah.
Ask a different
What do
question?
you define as combat?
Well, what I said was a combat zone.
Okay.
Combat the people that I've seen with PTSD in the service, and as I said, I worked in the VA during my internship, it could range from people who are in non-direct fighting situations to people who are in direct fighting situations. Obviously, the more directly you're involved in the active combat, the more severe that usually is. But the people who are also in other facilities in a combat zone are potentially susceptible to the effects of being constantly under pressure, being bombed, and those sort of things. I didn't talk to him about the details of it.
So everybody in Saudi Arabia where a Scud could land would be potentially in the combat zone?
Well, I don't know how the military defines it. I mean, that.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. I wanted to ask you that you would have problem recognizing and assessing problems with criminality. Is that what you said that this would cause?
No, I don't. Again, let me clarify this very clearly. I was hired to do a competency to proceed assessment, so I did not talk to him in any detail about what really did or did not happen.
Okay. Well, you talked about the records.
Correct. And the records give him, the VA records give him a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. They discuss his extremely unstable mood, his emotional volatility, his high anxiety, and they treat him with a variety of medications to manage those conditions.
So you mentioned his August 21st, the notes from August 21st. How about the notes with Dr. Reed on August 16th?
Give me just a moment. Let me see if I have that. I just received these records today, so I haven't had a chance to thoroughly review them.
And this is after a report from Susan Vaughn, also on August 16th.
Is this part of the VA records?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
What page, Mr. Christmas?
23 going over into 24.
All right, let me look on those pages, see if that helps. Are you talking about the numbers at the bottom of the pages? Or what you're looking
Yeah,
at?
it had printed at Viera and then it has page numbers.
Okay.
That's what I got, so.
Okay. And those are from what treatment date?
I believe August 16th, based on the records.
Okay, because the page that I have that's marked page 24 is from an entry date of February 29th, 2012.
Let me see if you have received this information. And let me read it and see if this is something you recognize. It's involving Susan Vaughn, deals with discussion topics, and it says the following: reports another episode with neighbors. They threatened my daughter, threatened to rape her. I was ready to go over there and kill them all with my bare hands. I'm at my wit's end. They filed an injunction against me. Patient upset, crying, this is getting out of hand and I can't afford to move, wants to talk to Dr. Reed, wants to know if Dr. Reed can go to court with him, denies any thoughts of harm to self, has no firearm, has no plan to harm neighbors. I have 911 on speed dial. Dr. Reed and everyone in Discovery has been good to me. I love every one of you. Informed messages will be relayed. Did you get that information?
Not that I know of.
Okay. How about the entry by Dr. Reed that follows that? Spoke with veteran to offer supportive therapy and allow him to ventilate anger and concern over neighbors' outrageous behaviors. He states he has dealt with this by deciding to avoid contacts with them, requested extra patrol cars and neighbor, and will have court hearing upcoming in the matter. He states he will not harm them because would end up in prison with my rights stripped and the effect on the family, and has decided to work on relocating when feasible with help of extended family who have been very supportive. He also has support of 18 fellow veterans who encourage him to feel secure and not need to take personal action. Did you receive that?
Not to my knowledge. As I said, I just got records today.
Okay. Well, you would agree that that type of information would be reflection about consequences, would it not?
Well, I never made any statement that led me to believe that he would meet the criteria for insanity or anything such as that.
No, sir, I'm not talking about insanity. You're saying what you testified earlier was about not understanding consequences of actions or limited ability to understand consequences of actions.
It was what I thought I was testifying to, and it may have been misstated or misunderstood by me, was his capacity to conform his behavior to the constraints of the law was the issue to me.
Okay. So you would agree that at least he understood the consequences.
Oh yes, I have no doubt.
And had reflected on that at least as of August 16th.
Yes.
And this happened in September.
Correct. I agree with you.
All right. Now, the records that you're referring to from Japan, I think, relating to the injury.
Yes.
At that time, did they note traumatic brain injury?
Yes, he had a skull fracture.
Okay.
And he also suffered from meningitis.
Okay.
And he had let me describe it. Just a moment. He had cerebral contusion, which means bruising of the brain, which is a traumatic brain injury. He had a traumatic central spinal fluid leakage from a brain injury. He had a mass in the right orbita and the right anterior skull base. He had a fractured skull and a laceration of the forehead and meningitis.
Okay. And what did the doctor say at the end after he'd been treated with that?
He was hospitalized for 3 months. What are you looking at?
Let's see. Final diagnosis from Kisato University.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get that?
Yes, that's what I just read off to you.
All right. And when did they diagnose the anger problem was related to that?
That I do not know, because what I have is the VA, I have a large gap, and what I have is the VA records which diagnose him with an organic affective disorder, which means a mood disorder secondary to a neurological condition, traumatic brain injury. So when he first got that, I don't know that answer.
Okay. So, do you have the report? I assume you're talking about Otaka, Dr. Hiromi Otaka? Is that the report you're referring to?
Are you talking about the traumatic brain injury?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Dated August 13th of 88?
Just 1 second. Yes. And then he was transferred from there to another hospital for 2 more months, apparently.
I don't have any other questions.
Can you redirect, Mr. Eisenmenger?
Yes, Doctor, just to reiterate, I don't believe you misunderstood my question. Perhaps the state misunderstood my question and your answer. I'd ask if you had an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Woodward's conditions would substantially impair his capacity to conform his behavior to the constraints of law. And
that's the question I thought I was answering.
And that's the one I asked. So could you repeat your answer so there's no confusion?
I think that given the documented condition, this is the kind, again, I'm backing up. I didn't talk to him about what really happened. I didn't discuss it. I didn't discuss the events. But in terms of a person who has these problems and is being treated for these problems, it is the type of problem you would expect would affect their capacity to conform their behavior, particularly, let me explain this. If you were charged with like a shoplifting charge or something like that that had nothing to do with control of emotions, I don't think the nexus is there. I don't think the connection is there. But when you talk about a person who is involved in a crime that's the result of extreme anger and disinhibition and aggression, and he's being treated for those kinds of things documented in the medical records, then I think that the case is to be made that that would affect his capacity to conform his behavior in those circumstances.
And if you add to that someone who is subjected to emotional abuse and duress almost on a daily basis for over a month, would it be even more difficult because of the repeated nature of the abuse that he was subjected to for him to conform his behavior?
Well, again, and without specifically talking about him, yes, external stresses like that would be expected to exacerbate the problems.
Okay. Now, the state also asked you about the 1988 brain injury and the diagnosis relating that to a condition. I understand that there's a gap in terms of the records and when the diagnosis was first made, but certainly before this incident occurred, it was well documented that correlation between the brain injury and the emotional condition.
He was diagnosed and being treated for these conditions well before this incident happened.
Thank you.
Any recross?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mays. You may step down. May he be excused?
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir.
Karen Ann Kilgallen.
Can you spell your last name for me, please?
Kilgallen.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, you may proceed with your statement.
Like I just stated, I'm Billy's maternal aunt, and I have had a close relationship with Billy all of his life. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what kind of a man Billy is. He's one of the kindest, most considerate, compassionate men I know. There are few people in this world that think of others before themselves. Billy is one of them. Billy's family and faith are the most important things in his life. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more dedicated, loving husband, father, and son. His family means the world to him. Billy has never been one to put importance on material things. Even though he wasn't what you might consider wealthy in a material or financial way, he was infinitely wealthy with the love of family and the solid friendships he's made throughout the years. If Billy saw that you needed something and he had it, he would give it without reservation. He has always enjoyed helping people, especially those less fortunate, a trait not many have. Even though we lived in different states, our family vacations were spent together. We've always been a very close family. Billy always talks about happy family memories he's had throughout his life. Family is where his heart is. Billy does not have a mean bone in his body. I've never heard him say anything disparagingly about anyone. Growing up, he was a good kid, and to my knowledge, has never been in any trouble. He's always courteous and treats everyone respectfully. Another very important aspect of Billy's life is his love of his country. Billy served his country honorably. However, like many veterans that have come home from war zones, He has sustained injuries while serving in the military. Due to a fall, he suffered a serious head injury, the loss of hearing in one ear, and PTSD, which his neighbors knew about. Like so many other veterans, he has endured flashbacks and anxiety. However, as a young person and into his adulthood, I've never known Billy to act out aggressively or angrily. Just the opposite. When he was feeling stressed, he would find a quiet place to rest, usually at home or his parents' home. Billy does not, nor has he ever had an aggressive or hateful personality. His nature was and is peaceful and loving. Trying to sum up my feelings, and more importantly, what I know to be true about Billy, is almost impossible to do in just the few minutes we have here today. Billy is a sweet man with a big heart and a wonderful spirit. He's a man of integrity and unquestionable morals. Your Honor, all too often bad things happen to good people. That's what's happened here. However, there's another side to this situation I'd like to remind everyone here about, and it's the indescribable harassment that Billy and his family had to endure. If not for the actions of his neighbors, we would not be here today. I'm hoping that what you hear today and read today from every family member and friend that love and support Billy, that it will help you see what a truly wonderful person Billy is, and that it will help in rendering your decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Kathleen Land, and I'm also maternal aunt to Billy.
Thank you. You have a statement to present?
Yes, I do.
You may proceed.
I have to say, given everything that's been going on in here today, this wasn't what I was expecting with the other side running through the whole trial all over again. I thought this was just to speak on the characters of the individuals involved in all of this. But I just wanted to let you know that. But I'm going to go ahead and read, even though it might be repeating what everybody else has said. As I said, my name is Kathleen Land, Billy's aunt. I live in Indiana. My husband and I had a dairy farm, which became a place that the family enjoyed many happy memories. Sadly, in 2004, my husband passed away from cancer, at which just that time I had to move to town. Billy really missed spending family time on the family. It was a place of peace. With family was something he treasured. I watched Billy grow from a baby to a loving son, husband, and father that he is today. You will never find a more caring and more compassionate man. He gives his heart, and he never looks for anything in return. Again, Billy served in Desert Storm. You have gone through that, and I thank God that they were able to save him. And when Billy came back, he came back with PTSD, and he lives with that, sadly, every day. These people that took advantage of his situation, how pathetic of them. Over the years, the VA was finally able to get him therapy and medication for his disorder, and things started to turn around. Your Honor, I'm asking that you give much thought to all that has been said here today and be lenient with his sentencing. Billy has never been in any kind of trouble in his life, except for this devastating situation that could have been avoided if only other people had let him live his life peacefully. These past 6 years have been heartbreaking for him and our family, and I can't even to imagine how we all will get through what might be ahead of us. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am.
Brian Wayne Land.
All right, and you have a statement to present, sir?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may proceed when you're ready.
Your Honor, my name is Brian Land, and I am Billy Woodward's first cousin. I can't even begin to tell you how unrealistic it seems for me to be speaking on Billy's behalf and not the other way around. Growing up, even though our families were separated by many states, we were fortunate enough to always get together for holidays and summer vacations. The summers were really special because Billy would get to come to our family farm, which he loved more than anything, and stay for extended periods of time. And it was during these times that we came to be more brothers than cousins, and when I got to know the quality of person he is. Billy is 4 years older than I am, and like most adolescents, I've always looked up to the other kids. Where this would normally lead me in the direction of mischief, Billy was always one to set a good example, and I can't tell you how many times he caused me to rethink things. Through the years and continuing on even now, no one has taught me more about the value of family, respect for others, and kindness than Billy has. I'd like to share with you an act of kindness that I not only witnessed, but was somewhat put out back by as well. Back in 2009, Billy was working for a vendor on the NASCAR circuit driving a truck. This employer provided Billy with a very nice camper to stay in while on the road, and when they were in Bristol, Tennessee, he invited my brother Scott and I to come stay the weekend. We accepted this invitation under the premise that we would have a camper for sleeping accommodations and made no other preparations. When we arrived, however, we found our camp set up outside under the stars next to his own. It turns out that late the night before, while checking out the Bristol campground scene, Billy witnessed two heavily intoxicated women struggling to set up their tent and receiving countless offers from the crowd of fellow campers that was gathered around. Most people in this situation would just go on about their business, but Billy stopped and offered to help them. But by this time, they had the tent really messed up, and he offered up the camper to help these two out of the bad situation. When we arrived to find this out, my brother and I were initially pretty upset, but were soon talking amongst ourselves about how we would expect nothing less out of Billy. The following morning, they offered to take Billy out to breakfast to thank him for helping them with their predicament. My brother and I tagged along. I'll never forget one of them telling us, while Billy was going to the restroom, that this was the nicest thing anyone had ever done for her, and asked if he was always this kind, to which my brother and I just looked at one another and replied, "Yep, that's Billy." During that conversation, they also offered to surrender the camper back to us, but we declined out of respect for Billy. It's these little acts of kindness and genuine concern for others' well-being that define who Billy Woodward truly is. I know there have been several instances in my life where a good example set by Billy positively affected my decision-making. Billy is a loving father, husband, and son. For him, family has always been the top priority in his life. If there was ever a chance to get together with family, Billy would never miss a minute. Whenever we have the opportunity to talk, the conversation usually revolves around the countless fun family vacations we enjoyed so much through the years. Billy has the biggest heart of anyone I have ever known, and seeing him have to go through this tragic situation has broken the hearts of all of us. I can't help but think what an awful shame it is that we've come to this point knowing what a kind and fun-loving heart of gold he has. I know I have nothing but love and respect in my heart for him, and nothing will ever change that. I pray often for him to be able to return to his family, which I truly believe is all he ever wanted. He has always been kind and generous to everyone we would come into contact with, and I never once seen him ask for anything in return. In closing, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to read this letter and hear my perspective of what kind of man Billy Woodward really is. As a family, we all love and miss him dearly, and very respectfully ask you for the utmost leniency as you consider Billy's sentencing. He truly is a good person. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Matthew Kilgallen, and I am Billy.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Spell your last name, please.
Kilgallen.
Thank you. And you may proceed.
All right. My name is Matt Kilgallen, and I'm Billy Woodward's cousin. Family, home, faith, and selfless are some of the words that fit Billy best. I'm one of the youngest cousins, and Billy is the oldest. Billy took it upon himself to always look out for me and make sure I was not left behind. As kids, I remember playing tag in their yard at night. Billy would stay with me and make sure I was not alone in the dark, and to help me climb the tall fence so I might not get caught. He was the one at my side when the waves got high in the wave pool at the local water park, making sure I was safe. He could have had a lot more fun if he just left me behind, but that's not who Billy is. He always goes out of his way to make sure everyone is included. In a world where so many are selfish, Billy is truly selfless. All my life, I've seen Billy put others in front of himself. He's a giver first and never worried if he'll be repaid. He was one of the first people I remember seeing give money to a homeless person, and countless times I watched him buy a meal for a hungry person outside of a restaurant. He's hands down one of the most loving and generous people I know. Billy is deeply involved in the lives of his immediate and extended families. Billy loved to travel and visit us out of state, but at the same time could not wait to be back home with Barbara and the kids. There was no place he felt more comfortable or wanted to be than home. Billy lives simply. He does not care about the latest and greatest. He just wants to be with those he loves the most. Billy's a loving father and husband to Ava, Ethan, and Barbara. He's a son that honors his father and mother. He's a shining example of Matthew 25:40, when Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." He's a faith leader for many in our family and an integral part of this entire family. Billy has always contributed to the greater good of society, and I hope one day he will be given a chance to contribute again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Please state your name.
Kim Raymond Kilgallen,
Can you spell your last name, please?
Kilgallen.
Thank you very much, sir. You have a statement that you'd like to present?
I do.
You may proceed.
We've heard some heart-wrenching testimony today from family and friends on both sides of the aisle, but we need to remember we would not be here if the events leading up to and taking place that night did not make Billy feel fear for his family's lives. He acted out of love for his family. And I would ask that you be as lenient as the law permits with your sentencing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please state your full name.
My name is Harold Harrop.
Can you spell your last name for me, please?
Harrop.
Thank you, sir. You have a statement to present to the court? Okay, you may proceed.
I met Billy Woodward after we bought our house next to his parents in 2007, Ann and Bill Woodward. Anytime I ever saw Billy, he was always polite, spoke to me. I had seen him interact with his wife and children, his family. He always seemed to be a wonderful man who cared deeply for his family. Billy's dad and I would meet Billy at a small pond behind Lowe's, and we would go fishing together. Billy would come to my auto repair shop and often pick up a scrap metal that I gave him, and at times to repair his truck. Billy is a very nice man. He would do anything to help anyone that needed anything. A week or two before everything happened, Billy came to my auto repair shop to have me service his truck. He had his children with him. He told me he was worried to leave them at home because of the issues going on with the neighbors. I feel bad for Billy and his family. I believe that he is being punished for protecting his family. Billy is a good man that would never harm anyone unless he had no choice. I'm sure there are many people in this world that would go to such extreme to protect their family. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, please state your full name.
Sharman Lee Thompson.
Can you spell your first and last names, please?
Sharman, S-H-A-R-M-A-N. Last name Thompson, T-H-O-M-P-S-O-N.
Thank you, ma'am. You have a statement to present to the court?
I have notes. I'm sorry that I don't have anything.
Okay,
to be
You
submitted
may proceed
formally.
with whatever you'd like to present. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, it's my honor to speak on behalf of Billy Woodward. I really don't remember when we didn't know the Woodwards. I've known him and his family many years, as did my mother and dad. There are several things about Billy that I know to be true. First, Billy loves and respects his parents. He is very grateful for their love and commitment to him and his family. Second, he loves his family, and frankly, he adores his children. When their first child was born, they felt so very blessed, and Billy was determined that that child would be spoiled. The child would know that they were very much loved, and he would make sure that she was spoiled. He was also so very proud of their second child. He brought his son, all bundled up in his car seat, to meet my mother. My mother and father both loved Billy, and he loved and respected them. Billy has lived out the biblical teaching to care for widows and orphans, and I am one of those. I lost my husband within only 2 weeks. It, of course, was shocking. Billy did every possible thing that he could to help me with my late husband's business, doing physical work, a lot of hard physical work. He refused to be paid, which is typical of Billy. He did everything he could to help. When my father passed, he did the exact same thing with my mother. He always called her Miss Norma. And whatever Miss Norma needed and wanted, or Billy thought that she might need or want, Billy did that for her. And for that, I am ever grateful. Billy refused to take money for doing any kind of work, no matter how difficult, how long it took, or what it was. You absolutely had to force him to take one thin dime, and then you just had to say to him, "This is for the children, take them to McDonald's." Otherwise, he would not take a dime. When the vast majority of Americans are not serving our country in the military, Billy volunteered to serve our country. He didn't have to, but he honorably served and was seriously injured. Billy is a good man, a true friend, and it is an honor to be his friend. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Please state your full name.
Marlon Lee McNear.
Can you spell your first and last names, please?
MarlaMcnear.
Thank you. You have a statement to present to the court?
I'm going to be reading off my notes.
Okay, that's fine. You may proceed.
I'm really nervous. Sorry.
Take your time.
I wanted to thank you for listening to me today and allowing me to speak. I have known Billy from high school, and currently I am a behavior analyst with 30 years of experience in mental health, and I am working toward my doctorate in educational leadership. Not that long before what happened, Billy and I reconnected online on Facebook, like many people do, and we're glad to see each other again and catching up with old times. We were reflecting on our younger days. I was a cheerleader, and Billy was a football player, and he was always very nice, very shy, very sweet, positive. He wasn't the star of the team, but he didn't need to be the star of the team because he was just 100% for the team. And making his commitment to his school and his team, he always did a great job and took pride and didn't need to be at the forefront. I was very glad to begin speaking with him again, and we began talking about our kids and our what we do, and he just absolutely was very, very apparent that he adored his children and his family. And another connection that we had was we both worked with rescue animals, which takes a very special person to do, and someone that has to have a very, very sensitive, very patient, and loving heart. Billy began to tell me about his past with his time in the service and his diagnoses, and me being in mental health could understand that. And I was extremely concerned because I could immediately tell that he went through some very serious things that were excruciating for him. One day we were talking and I began to tell him that I was having a problem with my neighbors. And I was concerned about the treatment that they were giving to their animals and each other. And that I was fed up and I was going to go over there and do something about it. And he just went wild. And he said, "You cannot ever do that. Please, I'm begging you. You have to promise me. You can't do that. You have to go get help." He said, "And I'm telling you that I've been through this, and I've tried everything with the law and things that the law will try to support you on, and that you can get their help. And Marla, I'm going to be honest, nothing is working. But I still have to tell you, try to work through it, but don't go alone. Because I'm worried about you and something could happen." So I promised him that I wouldn't go, and I didn't. And I'm glad, because not that much longer, there was a severe incident, and people were injured, and it could have been me. I am very thankful for his support. I'm thankful for what he has done for our country. He's been so passionate about his service to the military. But when I look back and I see the challenges that he's been through when he went into military training, it may have been the perfect storm for him with what he was being challenged with, add the injuries at such a difficult time with what you have to go through in the military and in coming out and trying to cope with all that. And then you have the added pressure of what I see in my children every day, which has become an epidemic in our country, and that's bullying. And quite frankly, I just have to say that these are all wonderful people. And it's horrible. Everybody loses. But there's a point where the harassment goes on and on and on and on. And you've made a commitment to your team. That's now your family. And you're seeing things in your own yard get destroyed, and your child run into the picture that he's going to be severely hurt, and that's your baby. And you have to
keep your commitment to your team. And he just went into a different mode, I believe, that night. And he couldn't take it anymore, and he couldn't dial it back. Because he is a good man with a huge heart. Sometimes I think that in a bullying incident, we hold the person as being bullied to a higher standard than the one doing the bullying, even though both may be inherently good people. Well, why didn't you report it? Well, why didn't you say something? Well, why didn't you use your coping mechanisms? And then you look at someone like Billy with all of the other things that he has, and you're holding him to a higher standard. A person that is just, without those issues, has breaking point. I can't even read my notes. I'm so upset. And I'm sorry that this happened. I even feel partly responsible. Because maybe I could have said something to help him like he helped me. Because I want to thank you for listening. And my prayers are with you when you make your decision. So please consider all the facts.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, Ann Teresa Woodward.
Thank you. You have a statement to present. You may proceed when you're ready.
Well, I was writing this letter. You probably have a copy of it also. I'm writing this letter today for my son to give you just a small glimpse into the past 50 years of his life and what he has meant to us and all of his family and friends. His love for his family, community, and friends and country can't really be put into words. Soon after he graduated high school, he couldn't wait to enlist in the armed services. He was very honored and proud to be able to serve his country. It truly was his passion to serve until he was injured. After his military service, he went on to become a master machinist. At one point creating shuttle transportation system flight hardware. Then he went on to work at Kennedy Space Center with his father. Billy always took great pride in everything he accomplished, giving 100% all the time. My son is a man of great character, integrity, and compassion. He would gladly be the first to offer his services to anyone in need. He gave freely and unselfishly to others, never wanting anything in return. He is a humble man and respectful to all. His friends would often tell me that to know Billy was to love Billy. He has a wonderful circle of friends who love and continue to support him today. Your Honor, our son is a very loving and caring man. He's been brought up in a Christian home. His love for Christ is unwavering. He has always been surrounded by loving relatives and family his entire life. The love he has for his family runs deep. One of his greatest loves is his wife, Barbara, and his two children, Ava and Ethan. He's a wonderful husband and father, and I pray one day he'll be able to be with them again. His father and I are very proud of the man he's become. Your Honor, please take into consideration our son's past history
He has never been in trouble as a child or as an adult. He has always lived an honest life and provided a loving home for his family. We will never lose hope. And I will continue to pray that my son's voice and rights will be upheld, and he will one day be able to return to his family. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mrs. Woodward, before you leave, I want to try and supplement some of the areas that the pre-sentence investigation did not do that are required by laws regarding the pre-sentence investigation. So I'd like to ask you a question. In terms of your son's education, do you know what the highest grade he completed?
He graduated high school.
He did. Address, even though I'm asking the questions, please address them.
He graduated high school, and he had went to BCC for a short time.
He received vocational training while he was in the military?
Yes, he did.
Currently, he is not employed because of his VA disability, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how long has he been determined to be disabled by the VA to the best of your
Oh my
recollection?
gosh. Long time.
And was the VA benefits, which as a result of this case he will no longer be receiving, his primary means of subsistence at the time of his arrest?
Yes.
I'd like to ask just if you could give the court a brief family history, you, your husband, other relatives, brothers, sisters, spouse, and children. Billy's. First of all, you're his mother.
I'm his mother.
Is his father still living?
His father is William Woodward III, and he will be also coming up here to speak.
Does Billy have any brothers or sisters?
Billy has a younger brother, Michael Ray Woodward, who is fire chief of Titusville Fire Department. He has two nieces and nephews, Jessica Woodward and Jaden Woodward. They're my youngest son's two children, and his wife, Stacy Woodward.
Is Billy married?
And his wife, yes, Billy's married, his wife Barbara, and he has two lovely children, Ava, who is soon to be graduating high school this year, and a 10-year-old son, Ethan.
How old is Ava?
Ava is 17, she'll soon be 18.
And he is currently married, and his relationship with his wife Barbara is good, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes it is.
We had some testimony about his military history, but he did volunteer for military service and served honorably.
Yes, he did.
Received a medical discharge.
He received an honorable discharge.
And he was receiving treatment for his physical and mental health through the VA at the time of his incident.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
And we've had some. He's never had an issue with alcohol or substance abuse?
No, never used drugs, never drank.
But he was on a number of prescribed medications.
From the VA, yes he was.
And the last category that is required by statute was residential history. At the time of this offense, where was he living?
He was living on Smith Drive, 86, I believe it was.
Okay. And how long did he live there approximately?
Oh my gosh. Quite a few years.
Excess of 12?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going back.
Yeah, going back about 12.
Okay. And, of course, he's been in custody since the time of his arrest, but his family's had to relocate. Is that correct?
Yes, they did.
All right. Thank you very much.
State, have any questions?
I do. I wanted to ask you about the work history. When is it that he last was employed?
Oh my
Well, it was the Kennedy Space Center.
Okay. That was my next question. Do you remember when that job ended?
No, I don't, Mr. Rasmus.
Okay. Was it a short time or a long time before this happened?
Long time.
Right. How about 2009? Does that sound right?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay. Was he receiving care at the VA when he was working at the Kennedy Space Center?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay. Do you remember the circumstances surrounding him no longer working there?
Yes.
Okay. And did that involve him threatening a supervisor?
I don't recall him threatening the supervisor. I know he had problems at work being bullied by the people that he worked with.
Okay. So there was an issue with him working with the people that he was employed with?
Yes.
Is that why he left?
No.
Okay, why did he leave?
I'm not sure. I can't, it's been a while, sir. I don't remember. My husband might.
All right. Has your son ever had issues with alcohol to your knowledge?
No.
Mr. Eisenberg, anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
William Francis Woodward.
All right, and you have a statement that you'd like to present?
Yes, I do.
You may proceed when you're ready.
First, I'd like to kind of reiterate what everybody else has said about my son's compassion, his heart. And I'm going to branch off into something else now. When he came home from the Army, he kind of messed around a month or two or so. And he says, Dad, he said, I want to go be a machinist. So he sought out a scholarship, so to speak, to go to machinist college, machinist school down at BCC, completed 2 years. And he started to work in various machine shops around the county. When you enter that kind of business, you have to pay your dues. You have to start out making widgets of any kind, and you can work your way up. And like my wife said, he worked his way up to making flight hardware at Kennedy Space Center. You know, the problem was it was a union shop. And my son has one of my traits. He doesn't like bullies. He doesn't like people to bully other people. And he got bullied in that machine shop. They reset his machines on him at night, and then he'd have to recalibrate and reset them up the next day. And this is critical flight hardware he was making. And it got to the point to where he was getting frustrated with the union guys. And a good friend of mine who was pretty high up in that company at that time looked over his shoulder and had him transferred to a place that wasn't union, and people got along better. And he did very well there. Somewhere around 2001, my company started looking for another person that did the job that I did. And there was nobody on the eastern side of the Mississippi that could do that job, that had learned how to do it. And they asked me about Billy. And I said, I'm not gonna say anything to him. I don't want him to work here. It's a horrible place. It's a union shop. People are awful with other people. And they called him anyway. And he said, yeah, he said, I'd like to work with my dad. And I thought, well, maybe I can help shelter some of that bullying from him. And we worked together about 5 years, I guess it was, had a great time. He was probably every bit as good as I was, or even better than I was at the job we did. And sometime in the fall, winter, spring of 06, 07, our lead man started picking at him. I noticed little things like he would drive up behind him on a field job where my son was working, and I might be over in another part of the field, and he would drive up behind him and blow the horn, scare him. And he started little stuff like that. And then one day he walked into our office with a huge, big old sausage. My son was sitting at his desk, and he slapped him on the side of the head with it and said, "Here, boy, I got you something." The next thing that happened was he came in to the office. By the way, I stood up. I stood up to try to protect my son. And he reached around and got up, and he come to me and he said, "Dad, don't. It's your job. You can't hit him, you can't hurt him because it's your job." Okay. So then, the next thing, our lead man came in, and I'm sitting there with my son. And he knew that my son was deaf in his right ear. And he put a referee's whistle in his left ear and blew it as hard as he could. I stood up again. And this time I threatened him. I said, "Leave my son alone." And he said, "You can't hurt me. I'm HR's little boy." And Billy again stood up and said, "Dad, don't do anything, please." Well, they kept going at it. And we get back to the employment record that Mr. Restus was talking about. Our lead man transferred out of our department into another department where a bunch of general plant mechanics were working. And they made his brother-in-law the lead man over our department because neither one of us could supervise each other. So I was in the office with the lead man, our former lead man's brother-in-law, when the call came in from him, "Can you send Billy to the ONC?" And he put the phone down and he says, "Billy," he says, "I got a job for you over at the ONC." And it's a terminology of buildings out there that we use. It's a big parking lot. Billy shows up, and our former lead man's sitting there with two other people in trucks. And they got out and came around to where Billy was working, trying to mark the ground, doing his job. And the lead man leaned out and said something. The two men went and filed violence in the workplace against him, and he didn't. And he didn't do anything. So later on, his wife was pregnant. We buried my mother, his grandmother, and then 3 weeks later they fired him for violence in the workplace. And I know he didn't do it. And I was even told by the union people later on that he didn't do it. And then Billy started working at different jobs. One of them was driving that truck that Brian mentioned. Then he went to Lowe's driving a truck, and he already had a CDL, so he knew what was right and what was wrong with the truck. And he went back at Lowe's management with information that the truck is not roadable. And they said, "You have to deliver the stuff." But he said, "I can't do it because it will go against my license." Well, he left there and messed around with some other things. And forward up to July, August of 2012, I was standing in my son's front yard when Carrie Blake put her hands together and her fingers out and started going boom, boom, boom at all of us, standing in my son's yard. I stand in my son's yard and I witnessed that. Then, I was standing in my son's front yard the day that Roger Picior turned 2 dogs loose on him, and the police officer came to Billy's front yard, and we stood there, and the police officer told him there's not much she could do about it. And I said, "But ma'am," I said, "that's a felony. That happened. That we can prove that. It's just video and audio files." And nothing happened. I was standing in my son's front yard, less than 10 feet from his sidewalk, when Roger and Bruce Blake walked up on his sidewalk and started talking about they had guns. We got shotguns. All the guns we got are legal. And I knew at that moment that if they had guns, it was illegal because they were all convicted felons, and I knew that personally. I was standing in my son's front yard. I started walking with my son at night to give him a witness presence because they were starting to follow him when he walked his dog around opposite directions on the block. So I started walking with him at night to get him a witness presence and protect him if necessary. And on one occasion, more than one, Gary Hembree and a friend of his would walk some dog and they would catch up with us, and Gary would say something about, "Billy, look what we got, we're in charge." And that was also the day, that was the day before that, a couple of days before that, we came out of the courtroom, and Gary Hembree baited my son with a, "Look what we got now." The judge threw everything out, so now we're free to do what we want. And yeah, Billy went across the street and hit him. And all I could do was go with him to try to help protect him from anything else that might happen. Connor, my son does not deserve to be in prison. He does not deserve it. And I'm going to ask you to please consider everything you've heard today. And please be as lenient as possible, because he just doesn't deserve the treatment he's gotten. Not only throughout his life, but from this court.
Thank you, sir.
I am not a relative. In fact, I'm not related to the other Thompson. My name is spelled Thomson.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Okay. I am a friend. I met Billy and his dad in 2000. I started on a contract with the Air Force at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Billy and his dad were doing locating services. I was doing construction management. I met his dad, stand-up guy, very good to work with. Shortly after that, I met Billy. Same thing. Real stand-up type individual, very strong work ethic. He needed something done, he got it done. Billy and I hit it off, his dad and I hit it off, we became friends. We'd go to lunch. Of course, his dad's a little older, so he and I became buddies. We regularly went to lunch. He would come and meet us. We do a Friday night barbecue thing. He often came and met us there. Other social events, I'd been to his house, he'd been to my house. At the time this happened, Billy was one of the only people that I allowed to have a key to my house. Not even my mother had a key to my house. I trusted Billy emphatically, and I still do to this day. Billy had a very strong sense of duty. Duty to his country, duty to his job, and of all things, duty to his family. At one point, Billy worked with me on a weekend. As one of the ladies said, he didn't like to take any money. He came to work with me, not to help a buddy out, and he didn't want to take any money. Sometimes I would have to sneak gas into his tank on his truck to pay him for what he did. One day he worked with me, helped me take down a tree. He didn't want to get paid, but I insisted and I gave him some money. I saw him a few days later and he said, "Rich, I used that money to buy a better car seat for my child." Now his wife didn't know he had that money. No one knew he had that money. He could have used it on himself or for anything. But his family came first. I'll tell you a story that I don't even think his family knows. 2003, one of my lifelong best friends was an Orange County Sheriff's deputy. He was working a car accident on I Drive when he was struck and run down. He was in the hospital with traumatic head injuries, brain swelling, and on life support. It happened at 8 in the evening. I spent the entire night at ORMC. That morning I left because I had to be at a job. I was on that job working. And we broke a force main. This is not a pleasant thing. A force main is a pipe that carries raw sewage. Every time the pump truck showed up, they pumped out the hole and they got to about within a foot of the pipe when the truck was full. the truck would leave to go get emptied, and before the truck got back, the pumps kicked on and filled the hole back up with sewage. This happened 4 or 5 times, and it was obvious the flow rate and the timing was such this truck was never going to catch up. While this is going on, my phone is ringing off the hook with family, friends, law enforcement personnel calling me and begging me to come to Orlando because they're going to remove him from life support. The truck came back, pumped out. There's a foot of raw sewage over that pipe. And I knew that I had to do what I had to do to get it fixed. And I jumped into that sewage, and Billy jumped in with me, and we reached down in the raw sewage and we fixed that pipe. And then Billy said he had some towels and some sanitizer in his truck and helped me to clean up a little bit, and he said, "You go, you need to go. I will stay here and get this done." And he did. He stayed there that night, he got everything bolted back up and good to go. And it allowed me to get to Orlando so I could be there when my friend was removed from life support. I will forever owe a debt to Billy. One of the reasons I'm here today. And that was the way Billy was with everything. Excuse me for 1 second. Billy told me what was going on in the neighborhood. I was aware we talked regularly, several times a week. At first, it started like one of these neighborhood things, but it got worse. It got terrible. Billy stopped coming to Friday night barbecues. At one point, we were working in Titusville. And I called him up and said, "Come meet us at Sonny's for lunch." And he's like, "Okay." And then he's like, "No, can't be there." I'm like, "What's the matter?" He said, "I had a neighborhood problem again." So I went to his house to find a Titusville police officer there. There was another incident, and the police officer, as usual, and nothing against law enforcement, but as usual, the officer wasn't there when it happened. So it's a civil issue. They can't do anything about it. And these people were very experienced with the criminal justice system, and they knew exactly how it worked. I don't think Billy's ever even had a traffic ticket. The officer talked to him for a while, and he said, "I'm sorry," and he left. It got to the point Billy would not leave the house. The threats against his family, his children, heinous threats, terrible threats against his children, the threats of burning the house down while they slept in it, he would not leave the house. He had become a prisoner there. As someone else said, if he left the house, it's because he took his whole family with him. I ask you for the greatest of leniency, and I want you to think that if you were living in that house under these terrorist threats, you would want Billy guarding your sleep. Please consider the greatest leniency. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please state your full name.
Jeffrey Scott Crow, C-R-O-W.
Thank you, sir. You have a statement to present to the court?
I do.
You may proceed.
I've known Billy Woodward now for 20 years, and throughout these years, he's been a trusted friend and well-liked neighbor to me and my family. Bill was the kind of neighbor that you just love to be around. He would do anything he could to help you whenever you needed assistance. I cannot count the number of times that I have witnessed Billy help an elderly neighbor in the neighborhood, either after hurricanes or when trees need to be cut down. And probably other people have said this too. He never asked for money. It was always out of the kindness of his heart that he did this. And I think because of all these acts of kindness that I've seen towards other people, he's made me a much better person than I would have been from seeing this.
Bill's the kind of guy that would literally give you the shirt off his back and think nothing of it. I personally known of times that he's provided meals for neighbors. He's paid off utilities for neighbors. And one time I remember an instance where he had given Christmas presents to help a neighbor out that couldn't afford to buy presents for their kids. Bill's a very simple man. He saw everybody as his friend. Due to this fact, I think that over time some people have taken his good-hearted generosity to advantage of it over the years. He would go and help anybody that he could, and I just can't explain the type of person he was. He would be the person that you'd want to be your neighbor. He showed nothing but kindness and love towards everybody I've ever seen. Now, the situation that happened in our neighborhood had escalated. No one should ever have to go through that. My wife had made comments during the trial where she carried a handgun out at nighttime. And I can only imagine that was our fear, what Mr. Woodward and his family had to go through at that time. The bottom line is that I hope this never happens again to anybody else, because the situation with your back against the wall, we couldn't get help through the judge or the police. We were in a tough situation. And I pray you have mercy on his soul. He was just an outstanding person.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Eisenmenger, you had indicated that was the end of the presentation of the defense. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No additional evidence. I do want to go back briefly and address the issue of the pre-sentence investigation. Family history, marital history, military history, physical and mental health of the defendant, and residential history are all required by statute as part of a pre-sentence investigation, none of which were done by probation and parole in this case, under the mistaken belief that because my client exercised his right not to be interviewed, that somehow removed their obligation to comply with the statute. We have undertaken, as part of our presentation of evidence, so as not to delay the sentencing, some testimony through his mother as to those issues. If there's any issue about the inadequacy of the record that we've taken upon ourselves to put into the record so not to delay sentencing, then I would like to know now, and if there is, then we would request a continuance of the sentencing and an order for probation and parole to fulfill their statutory responsibilities. If the court is satisfied, the state is satisfied with the information that we've supplemented the pre-sentence investigation with its sentencing, then it would not be necessary to do so.
State, have any input?
Well, if this was going to be an issue, I wish we'd had discussed it for the day, because this PSI has been around since March, I guess March 20th, or it was e-filed on March 27th, and we could have gotten this accomplished before dealing with it now. I'm not in a position to quarrel with anything. Many of the things that would be in here came out in the trial because the crime happened in the defendant's neighborhood and his house was involved in it, and the family situation was involved in it. I think the only thing we didn't learn was about his brother. Most of his family testified.
Well, you know, I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Respis, but I'm looking at the pre-sentence investigation, and the bottom of page 4 is the first section that appears to be blank, if you will, because of the notes indicating that an interview was rejected by the defendant. His education,
Right.
Do you agree that the record's been supplemented satisfactorily by the testimony of Mr. Woodward's mother?
I think it was his father that supplemented hers, so I guess between the two of them.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that the state is satisfied, and if the defense is indicating that if the state or the court are not satisfied, then maybe we need to reschedule and have this completed.
I don't want to reschedule this.
I understand that you may not wish to reschedule it, so I'm asking, as Mr. Eiseminger has presented, is there any dispute of the supplemental testimony that can, in essence, supplement this pre-sentence investigation? So it's based on the education history, the employment summary, financial status, family history, marital history, military history, physical and mental health, residential history, alcohol, substance abuse, and the defendant's plan. I'm not sure who they would seek out to find out what the defendant's plan, but
that's not actually required by statute. And again, the alcohol, substance abuse is actually optional, but we did address it. What is required by statute is family history, marital history, military history, physical and mental health, and residential history. And quite honestly, this got filed when it was e-filed in my file, and I did not review it until just a couple of days ago. I did have a conversation with probation where they had contacted me and demanded an interview with my client, and I explained to them that on my advice, we were not doing that. And that also failed to make a pre-sentence investigation. But more importantly, I was rather shocked when I read this, that they were bypassing their statutory obligation by trying to create an obligation by my client to be interviewed, which is not only contrary to his constitutional rights, but contrary to statute. There's nothing in the statute that says this information has to come from an interview with the defendant. That's various different ways to verify this. They didn't do anything, and they're required to do it. And again, when I discovered it, I decided that I would just address it through witnesses, but I don't want there to be a claim down the road at some point in time that there was some dispute or some inadequacy of material that the state attorney, the state of Florida through probation and parole was required to do and did not do.
Well, the evidence in this case covers these issues. There's conflict in it. I mean, the defendant told Ms. Kane, was it McCaskey, that he left employment as a result of that he threatened to kill his supervisor. His father contests that assertion. So, I mean, there's a dispute in the record. Mother didn't know when he left work, but we're satisfied that the court has a flavor of how his employment situation. There's no dispute that he was receiving benefits from the VA or veterans benefits when this incident happened, and that was how they were, that along with his wife's income, that was how they were surviving. So we think there's enough information for the court to make this decision. It's not in the pre-sentence investigation.
And I assume that also goes that there's no dispute that he was disabled at the time of this incident. Because
that's
physical
correct.
and mental health is a required section.
We received the information from the VA. I think we've had examination and cross-examination on some of the VA records. I'm happy to put those into the record if the court and counsel want them. So that's there.
well, I want to ensure that both parties are satisfied with the pre-sentence investigation and the supplement to the record with the additional testimony that was presented by Mr. Eiseminger through the witnesses and the family members on those areas that are, in essence, left blank in the pre-sentence investigation. So is the state satisfied with the supplement of the record?
Yes, everything's not in there, but I'm satisfied.
All right, and the defense is not asking for any further relief. You're not asking to continue this any further for the Department of Corrections to, in essence, fill in those gaps?
Not without representation by the state. Based on the representation of the state, they're satisfied, hence the issue for me.
All right, thank you. The court is satisfied as well and has obviously received additional supplemental testimony to supplement those responses and information that are otherwise included in the pre-sentence investigation. So, Mr. Eisenmeyer, with that, are you resting at this time as far as any evidence or additional?
Presentation of evidence, I just have case law and argument to make to the court.
Okay, and would you like to argue first?
However the court wants. If I may approach, I have some case law.
You may.
Presented to the court. I'm giving copies to counsel.
Okay, thank you. All right, the defense's argument in regards to the sentence.
Judge, there are several statutory and non-statutory mitigating factors, I believe, that the evidence throughout the trial and including presentation today has established. First and foremost, I believe the evidence is overwhelming that the victims in this case were the initiators of the violence in this situation, that their harassment was ongoing for a significant period of time, that they subjected the defendant to extreme duress, that the defendant at the time that he was being subjected to this had essentially a diminished capacity by virtue of his mental and physical health as a result of his brain injury and his PTSD. More importantly, the evidence is overwhelming that not only were the alleged victims in this case, or deceased and the injured individual in this case, aware of it, that it was a focus of their activities directed specifically against Mr. Woodward and generally against his family and any neighbor who did not support them in this action. The evidence. Now, part of the issue in this case, obviously it was the defense of self-defense, and one of the issues comes is that despite the fact that the jury, by virtue of their verdict guilty of second-degree murder, rejected the justifiable use of force, whether or not the court can still rely on victim provocation and the actions of the victim as a downward departure. And I cited to the court and provided a copy, State of Ty Van Lee at 553 Southern 2nd, 258. It's a Second District Court of Appeals 1989 case. It is still good law. The only negative treatment, as is noted in that, was the State v. Embry, which did not extend that to a situation involving grand theft. The facts of Embry had little or nothing to do with victim provocation. And so in terms of victim provocation, this is still good law in the state of the law itself. And so what the finding of the Second District Court of Appeals essentially is even though a self-defense claim may have not been sufficient to be a complete defense in the eyes of the jury, it still can provide a mitigating factor which the court can rely upon for a downward departure. And certainly if there was any case that indicated a factual pattern of extreme provocation by the alleged victims in this case, it would be this one. There is also the issue of whether or not Mr. Woodward requires specialized treatment and whether or not he is amenable to treatment. There are two cases that I cited to the court. The Chubbuck case, 83 Southern 3rd, 918, which is a 4th District Court of Appeals case in 2012, and the Mitchell case, cited at 147 Southern 3rd, 93, which is a 2nd District Court of Appeals case following Chubbuck and basically reaffirming the ruling in Chubbuck. And that is essentially to warrant a downward departure, the defendant had to merely prove by a preponderance of the evidence that he had a physical disability or a mental disorder that was unrelated to substance abuse or addiction, and that he needed specialized treatment and he was amenable to that treatment. both the testimony during the trial itself about his disability, the fact that the state had indicated that the supplemental information, that there was no dispute about his disability, the testimony of Dr. Mings today, that both his physical disability, which has manifested itself in an organic mental injury, and his PTSD not only requires specialized treatment, but the defendant had been participating in specialized treatment by the VA for a number of years, establishes both the need for specialized treatment and that he is amenable to it. Both the Mitchell and the Chubbuck courts retreated from the requirements of previous case law, had said that it required a defendant to establish that he required specialized treatment, which was unavailable in the DOC. Both Chubbuck and Mitchell stand for the proposition that it's not the defendant's burden, it would be the state's burden by those cases to prove that the specialized treatment was available in DOC. There has been no showing of that in this particular case. So the mitigating factor has been fully proven and not disputed by any evidence by the state. I've cited the Cazell case, which is 42 Southern 3rd 252, more for the general proposition that a court's decision whether to depart from the guidelines is a two-part process whereby the court must first determine whether it can depart and then decide whether it should depart. We believe that the evidence is overwhelming in this situation, that there are mitigating factors that would allow, we only really have to establish one, but there are multiple in this case. There's also non-statutory mitigating factors in this particular case. The evidence supports that as a result of this, he's going to suffer the collateral punishment of loss of his VA benefits as a result of this conviction. There was testimony during trial and that there's more testimony today regarding that. That's an additional punishment that applies to Mr. Woodward that is not contemplated by statute, that really only applies to disabled veterans. And we would like the court to consider that as a non-statutory mitigating factor. We also have the statutory mitigating factor that his capacity to appreciate the criminality of his conduct and conform his activities to the constraints of law was substantially impaired. Again, we believe that both the testimony at trial, the testimony of Dr. Mings today, the testimony that really came out of his medical records of the VA itself, that the most recent visit just before this incident pretty much defines Mr. Woodward's state of mind and ability as affected by his disabilities to conform his activities. It shows the struggle that he was having given the provocation of his neighbors, his fears for his family, the fact that he felt that he could control his activities as long as his family's safety was not compromised. It is, of course, our position that his actions in this particular case were prompted by concerns for his family and that he was acting what he believed was genuine issues regarding the safety of his family and reacted to that. The jury's rejection of first-degree murder in theory and acceptance of the second-degree murder makes these sentencing arguments even more relevant because we have a situation where the jury has rejected any notion that this was premeditated. They have rejected any notion that it was under any theory other than a crime of second-degree murder is quite often referred to a crime of passion and a crime of response without any conscious intent to kill. So all of those theories have been considered and rejected by the jury in returning a verdict to second-degree murder. And therefore, the factor of victim provocation becomes even more significant in this type of situation. The Hines case, which is cited at 817 Southern 2nd, 964, likewise deals with this issue. And it's a Second District Court of Appeals case as well. It holds that a downward departure sentence can be imposed even though a jury rejected a self-defense claim. In this particular case, the court felt like it could not use that as a mitigating factor, and it was remanded for sentencing because the law is contrary to the court's mistaken belief in the Hines case that the jury verdict would prohibit. Instead, the courts have held significantly in a couple of different cases, but specifically in Hines, that the downward departure based on the alleged victim's conduct as an initiator, willing participant, and aggressor or provoker of the incident, as listed in 921-00164F Florida statute, is a statutory allowed mitigating factor that can be used as a basis for downward departure. Based on the issue, there is a mitigating factor that I think deserves some consideration and may not be fully developed in this case because of the issue of remorse. And we have a situation, well, definitely there's evidence in the record, testimony of Mr. Woodward, that he regrets that the incident happened and wished that it could have been resolved a different way. His belief that he was justified in his actions came throughout that. The question is whether that is not indicative of remorse. And I would suggest to the court that it is not. It is rather indicative, if you look at the totality of his behavior in this particular case, it is indicative of a person who tried to resolve these issues in every other way. Mr. Woodward went out of his way to report these actions to the police and seek police protection for himself and his family and his neighbors. Other neighbors went out of their way to report this conduct to the police. And the police were not able to provide any action. Mr. Woodward sought injunctive relief through the courts. And because he did not ask for the right type of release, asked for essentially repeat violence relief, instead of asking for injunctive release based on stalking or aggravated stalking, he was denied that relief. So Mr. Woodward was essentially left on an island where he felt that he had no option other than to protect his family. It is still our position that Mr. Woodward waited and acted only until he felt that action by the deceased was imminent, though we do not believe that that is a requirement. And of course, that's one of our motions for new trial and potential points on appeal as to whether or not that requirement is present when you have an aggravated stalking. But the fact that Mr. Woodward felt that his actions were justified does not change the fact that he tried to avoid any other action and consistently had indicated throughout his discussions, both to his treater, to law enforcement, to other people, such as his friend, school friend who testified, that it was a last resort. Avoid that. Do the right thing. Report it. Get the people involved. That was his focus. And I do not think that that is incompatible with remorse. I think it's indicative of remorse. And so therefore, I'm asking the court to also consider that this was done in an unsophisticated manner and was an isolated incident. I also recognize that the state may argue that it's not an isolated incident because of what happened at the courthouse. But I would suggest to the court that that is a continuing course of events, prompted and provoked, according to the testimony, by the alleged victims in this particular case. So that does not change the isolated nature of this. Certainly, Mr. Woodward has never had any problem with the law in any way, shape, or form that was not directed toward the initial provokers and aggressors of this particular incident. So we are asking the court to sentence Mr. Woodward to 25 years, mandatory minimum, because it's required. You have agree that you have no discretion under the statute in terms of this. Where you do have discretion is whether or not to run those sentences consecutive or concurrently. We're asking you to run them concurrently. We're asking you to find one or more of the mitigating factors for downward departure so that the court does not need to impose the approximately 45-year sentence that is at the low end of the guidelines. And it is our strongly held position that that is a sentence that, quite honestly, under the circumstances of this case, is harsher than it needs to be. And it certainly is a situation that, had the court had more discretion, we would be asking for a greater exercise in the court's discretion. I also want to put on the record, because it may come back in some way, shape, or form, Mr. Woodward had indicated to counsel a desire to address the court on the remorse issue, and it was my advice, and based on my advice, that Mr. Woodward did not make a statement today because of the appellate issues going forward, and our hopes and beliefs that he will receive a new trial, and likewise did not make a statement in the pre-sentence investigation. So that was 100% a decision by counsel that Mr. Woodward acquiesced to.
All right, before I hear from the state, just so I'm very clear, Mr. Eisenmenger, on the factors that you're asking me to find mitigating circumstances pursuant to 921.0026, you are arguing 2C, 2D, 2F, 2J. Did I miss any others other than the non-statutory loss of the
I apologize,
benefits?
I don't know them by number.
Okay.
So I would have to state them. The statutory factors that the alleged victims were initiators, aggressors, or provokers of the offense.
Okay, that's F.
That Mr. Woodward's capacity to appreciate the criminality of his conduct and conform his conduct to the constraints of society.
That's C, thank you.
The need, the existence of two conditions that need specialized treatment and his amenability to specialized treatment.
Okay, that's D.
That he acted under extreme duress. That duress was directed toward him by the alleged victims in this case.
All right, that's G. I didn't state that earlier, but I will note that. And then the
non-statutory factor of the collateral consequences of the VA actions and loss of disability benefits and VA benefits as a result of this conviction.
I think you also were arguing that the offense was committed in an unsophisticated manner.
Yes, I did.
Okay, and that is J.
I argued that it was done in an unsophisticated manner, it was an isolated incident, and that the defendant's actions and the way he conducted himself demonstrates sufficient remorse for that mitigating factor.
Okay, thank you. State's argument?
Well, let me start with where we agree, and then we'll deal with the other side. My understanding of the law is a little different than Mr. Eisenmanger's on what they're required to prove on D, 921-0026D. And I'm basing that on State versus Owens, which is a 5th District case, 95 Southern 3rd, 1018. And I think that case says that the defense, the state, it doesn't matter, neither side needs to show anything about whether or not treatment's available in prison, because that's not included in the legislation, and the court should not put extra requirements in legislation that's not there. I think that's me summing up what Owen says, but frankly, what has to be shown is what's in the statute, which is that he requires specialized treatment for a mental disorder. It's not related to substance abuse or addiction, and the defendant is amenable to treatment. And we're not disputing that he's shown amenability because he was being treated right up until this happened, and that the issue that he had the issue before, we're questioning whether or not it's appropriate under the circumstances to use that as a basis to downward depart, but that departure ground, I believe, is present. The suggestion of the other mental mitigator, I would suggest, was not shown. That's, I've got State versus Milici. It's another 5th District case, 219 Southern 3rd, 117. Now here, the doctor has conceded that the defendant recognized the consequences. He was talking about the consequences a short time before, with his doctor, a short time before the crime happened. And there's no evidence, and the doctor repeatedly said, I can only say this in general terms, there was no evidence that he could not conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. And you have to have competent evidence that supports the finding. That's on head note 10, which is page 6 in the way I provided it to you. And this talks about Malachi presented no expert testimony to establish that his alleged mental health issues prevented him from appreciating the nature of his criminal nature of his actions. Here, they presented no evidence about how his mental health issues prevented him from conforming his conduct to the requirements of law. And you take that along with the facts we have in this case, because while the jury didn't find him guilty of first-degree murder, what they did find is that he committed a crime with malice aforethought, that he committed an action that he should have known could kill people, which going over and shooting them multiple times would be that. And we have to look at the facts and circumstances that he was faced with, because this is not an impulsive act, Your Honor. The evidence is undisputed, because we have it on a videotape, that the defendant was sitting out there for more than 20 minutes, and that no provocation was going on at the time he did this, which is one of the reasons I'm confident that the jury rejected justifiable use of force in this case. So there's no factual support for that he had an inability to conform his conduct to the requirements of law. What we have here, and what the evidence has shown throughout, when you take out the square peg and the round hole justification, where the efforts to justify, this whole case started off as a mental health case. And it was a mental health case that did not fit into insanity. And that's what the defendant talked about. And Judge Earp found that credible. I'm suggesting the jury found that credible, and I'm asking you to find it credible, that his statements about why he did these things was he was out there and he snapped. Well, he snapped and made a bunch of decisions to do these things, but he knew what he was doing. He knew it was wrong. His behavior after he did it is consistent with his knowledge that it's wrong, when he drops his firearm and puts his hands over his head and allows himself to be cuffed. So there's nothing about this case that shows that that particular downward departure ground would be present, and I would suggest the court should reject that. The next question, and I guess it's, if we're dealing with the night the incident happened, then the court could find the victims were the initiators, because they were the ones out there running their mouths about come out and fight and showing their behinds and doing the things that are on, the state never contested because it was bad behavior. And so if that's the type of initiation that justifies someone going out and killing, then I would suggest that might mitigate. The case they're citing is when genuine self-defense is at issue. And I would suggest this is taunting to make someone mad, which they succeeded in doing, and he reacted to being angry. I don't believe that's the type of initiator, provoker, that someone says, okay, the court should consider mitigation. If we go back to the whole picture, this whole incident starts with the defendant getting into it with Mr. Hembree. And it was about the chickens, because Mr. Hembree reacted to him accusing his daughter by going and taking a picture of some chickens, and here we go. He gets angry about that, and he initiates and wants to fight. There was two people, there was testimony by Kim Salisbury about what happened at the courthouse. And if that's believed, and it's entirely consistent with what happened, the defendant, who was angry that the court didn't give him what he wanted, took it out on Mr. Hembree. Nothing more. And Ms. Salisbury was dealing with the issues that she was scared and had gone into the bathroom, and that's why they were there. And the defendant felt because they were still there, he needed to attack them. So I don't believe that the court should accept that as a mitigator in this circumstance. The defendant was under the domination of no one else, so I don't see how G can apply. He may have been under duress. We can debate whether or not he was under extreme duress, but he wasn't under the domination of anyone. He was his reasons for being there were of anger, because these folks had treated him and his family this way, and he wanted to get even. The last statutory mitigator that I heard was the offense was committed in an unsophisticated manner. I would suggest that there was nothing unsophisticated about this. The defendant waited until his family went to sleep, or he thought they were asleep, armed himself, lay in wait, and waited until the situation was appropriate for him to launch his attack. Now, he went over there and shot him multiple times. The jury didn't find premeditated intent, so they found that he went over there with evil intent to shoot people multiple times, and 2 people died and 1 didn't. But that is not, it's not unsophisticated. It's not isolated, because by my count, the defendant had been arrested. That was the 3rd arrest for the defendant related to these parties. The first arrest involved the firearm that was ultimately charged as an obstruction, or I think a disorderly conduct. The second arrest was the event at the courthouse, and the third arrest is when he killed 3 people, or killed 2 people and almost killed a third. And I would suggest there's no evidence of remorse in this case. The last downward departure ground that I believe is there's some evidence that there's a suggestion there's some evidence about VA benefits. And I would suggest there's no evidence that's been presented here meaningfully about the consequences of the crime. The defendant, in his statement to the detective, talked about the consequences, and that potentially being one of them, along with not being able to go forward with the house purchase and a number of other things. I would suggest that that is not the type of evidence that would be sufficient where the court can make findings one way or the other about that. I don't think there's evidence one way or the other about that, and so I would suggest that you reject that. Now, the state's position is that what we're punishing Mr. Woodward for is his vigilantism, his perceived decision to enforce his own laws as it relates to these victims. Because essentially he gave them a death sentence or severe injury as a result of committing misdemeanor stalking against him on the evening that this happened. And that's by repeatedly coming up and baiting him to fight or showing their behinds or doing things that were harassment. And the case is not an impulsive one. We now know that he'd been thinking about seriously hurting or killing these people for weeks. For weeks he'd been thinking about this. And we also know that he was planning on moving. His statement to the police was he's planning on beginning moving the next day. So this was a crime that happened because he was angry at the way his family, he perceived his family had been treated, the way he'd been treated, and this was his way to punish them for those acts. And that's why he did what he did. This was not about fear. This was not about threat of immediate harm. It was none of those things. And this morphed into this when mental health was not going to be a defense in this case. So the question the court has is, what does the legislature say the primary purpose of sentencing is? And the primary purpose of sentencing is punishment. So how do we punish someone that's killed one person? How do we punish someone that almost killed another person? How do we punish someone that actually killed the third person injured in this, shot in this? And my suggestion is that, how do we let that person out into society when he's demonstrated those types of anger control issues anyways? I mean, he was getting help. And he had rationalized. And he still convinced himself that this was the right thing to do, that he can go, that there was his own personal war that had been declared, and he had the right to treat them as combatants on a battlefield and execute them. Because that's what he told the law enforcement from the beginning, and that's what he did. The state's suggestion is that the appropriate sentence is life. And how you structure that, you can give him 3 consecutive 25-year sentences, and that should do it. You can give him a life sentence and everything concurrent, and that will do it. But if you're going to give him less than that, I encourage you to put him on supervision for the rest of his life, and that whatever probation conditions you have, that it includes mental health treatment and counseling if he ever does get out. Because I perceive that if he gets out and someone makes him angry and he doesn't like the way he feels he's being treated, because it's almost interesting listening to his father as he's making excuses for his son. The defendant seems to have problems interacting with people and getting into situations where there's a perception that he is being bullied. And then he gets angry as a result of that. And then ultimately we end up in court here where no one wants to be, and everyone feels horrible because his family's punished with him, these survivors are punished, and we are left as a judicial system to pick up the pieces. So I ask you to reflect on those things and reflect on the appropriate sentence in the case, and again, we would recommend that you sentence him to a life sentence. Thank you.
Actually, just very briefly, Barbara.
You may.
Statutory mitigating factor is extreme duress or under the substantial domination of another. We do not suggest that the second prong of that exists in this case, but it's not necessary to have both for that statutory mitigator. There's certainly evidence of extreme duress. There's also, essentially, Black's Law Dictionary defines an aggressor as a person by his or her wrongful act provokes, brings about, or continues an altercation. A provoker is one who engages in conduct or actions toward another as tend to arouse rage, resentment, or fury in the latter against the former, thereby causing the latter to do some illegal act against or in retaliation to the person offering the provocation. That is the state's position of what they think happened. And yet they're denying the alleged victim's role as the provoker. They sat there and told the court that it is their theory of the case that Mr. Woodward felt provoked by the actions not only that night, but prior to that night. And in their view, did some illegal act in retaliation against the provoker. Well, that's exactly what the definition of a provoker is, and the fact that the victim is the provoker is a statutory mitigating factor. Now, admittedly, it is not our position that he acted in retaliation. It is our position that he acted in self-defense. But that's not necessary to the mitigating factor one way or another of whether or not the alleged victim was the provoker. By definition, the alleged victims in this case were provokers. And not only, it's always fascinating to me that the state conveniently leaves out the most significant provocative threats. Burning somebody's house while they slept, having their daughter kidnapped and anally raped, threats that were repeated by multiple people in this group, and then the actions of burning something while making threats toward him that night before he acted. All of those qualify as not only aggressive acts, but provocation, both of which qualify as mitigating factors.
And again, based on the jury verdicts that were rendered on January 31st, as to count 1, which is the verdict of guilty of second-degree murder with discharge of a firearm causing death as to victim Gary Hembree, I will adjudicate Mr. Woodward guilty of that charge and order him to serve life in prison. As to count 2, the jury verdict of guilty of second-degree murder with the discharge of a firearm causing death as to Roger Picior, I will adjudicate Mr. Woodward guilty and order him to serve life in prison. As to count 3, the verdict of attempted second-degree murder with discharge of a firearm causing great bodily harm as to Bruce Timothy Blake, I will adjudicate Mr. Woodward guilty, and I will order him to serve the lowest permissible prison sentence as noted on the score sheet, which the court has accepted, of 543 months, which equates to 45.25 years. All of these will run concurrent. I will order a mandatory court cost of prosecution of $100. I will order restitution but reserve as to the amount. And I will also order cost of investigation if the state can present adequate evidence in the future but reserve as to the amount. And the defendant is entitled to original jail credit of 2,047 days in this case. Mr. Woodward, I'm also required to advise you of the right to appeal the judgment and sentence in this case within 30 days, and if you cannot afford to hire an attorney for the purpose of the appeal, one will be appointed for you. Is there anything else?
I have an affidavit of indigency. I prepared a motion, but because of the hour, we won't be able to electronically file it.
Okay.
I will file it tomorrow morning, asking for the public defender to be appointed on appeal. Also concurrent with that, we will file the notice of appeal and statement of judicial acts to be reviewed and designation of the records, which are the trial attorney's obligations. So I'd ask the court to go ahead and appoint the public defender without the necessity of us having an additional hearing.
All right. State, have any input on the appointment of the public defender for purpose of the appeal and the finding of indigency for Mr. Woodward?
We're not going to be involved in his counsel status.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I will find that Mr. Woodward is indigent. I'll appoint the public defender for purposes of appeal. That is forthcoming. That will be filed tomorrow. And anything else the defense would like to address?
No, ma'am.
Anything further from the state?
I would like to address a couple of things. The first thing is I believe in each of the accounts there needs to be a 25-year minimum mandatory sentence.
So I need to note that on the record then?
I believe you do.
As to counts 1 and 2?
All 3.
Okay, as discussed previously, I will also note for the record that there are minimum mandatory sentences of 25 years on counts 1, 2, and 3. I will note that and include it in my judgment and sentence.
Right. And I have concerns about the sentence on count 3 as being potentially illegal because in the same score sheet you have sentencing to a guideline sentence or one that's in excess of 543 months, and the statutory maximum for count 3 is 30 years. I think that's the most you're going to be able to give them. Do you disagree?
No, I think it's an illegal sentence on count 3.
Right. I think you, if it was a situation where it was just count 3 and it was 543 months and you needed to do that to get it up there, that would become the new statutory maximum. But I think because he's been sentenced to in excess of 543 months on the other 2 counts, that you have to give him at most 30 years on count 3.
All right, well, I perhaps misunderstood the Smith versus State case, 93 Southern 3rd 387, that holds that when the lowest permissible sentence on a score sheet exceeds the statutory maximum, the lowest permissible prison sentence must be imposed, since I didn't find a downward departure.
Right.
So if the parties agree that that's an illegal sentence, I certainly don't want to impose an illegal sentence on as to count 3. So,
well, I think it's going to come back as a 3800 motion. Can I look at Smith and see what just so I can take a quick look, because I think that Smith may be a situation where there was no count that was above.
I don't know that I have the actual case with me. It may.
Can we pull that?
I mean, you can certainly pull it up. The Smith versus State case, which is 93 Southern 3rd 387. And that's what I was following as to count 3.
Sorry, you said
93 Southern 3rd 387.
I think I would have to look, but it doesn't look like there's any other counts he was sentenced on.
Is the state arguing the maximum sentence on count 3 is 30 years then?
I think under these circumstances it is 30 years, Judge. I think if it was there by itself, or there were none of the counts reached 45, because I think the law is if you have multiple counts and you stack them and it doesn't reach the statutory maximum, then you have to, it doesn't reach the threshold of the minimum sentence, then that becomes the statutory maximum. But I think that case, Smith, looks like there was only one count, and there was a plea agreement, and they treated it as a first-degree felony when it was in fact a second-degree felony. So what was the score sheet? It was 337.8 months, so that became the statutory maximum for that count instead of 15. I'm sorry, I can try and research it.
Well, I certainly, like I said, do not want to enter an illegal sentence as to count 3. I've already pronounced sentences as to counts 1 and 2.
I'm doing a lot of talking, so I'll let Mr. Eisenmaker talk.
It's an academic exercise, but my understanding without researching the issue is what Mr. Rasmus says is correct. Since you've got the guideline range by including the 2 second-degree murder convictions, and you sentenced above the guideline range in second-degree murder, then you can't enhance the third count. If for some reason, academically, counts 1 and count 2 were stricken, and you were left with count 3, you would not get the same guideline range without the points of the murder case. So I think it's an illegal sentence. That's my position. And
okay.
I would include that on our notice of appeal because that's my position.
I think that's the answer. It's 30.
All right. Then I will modify my sentence as to count 3. Again, I was not intending to impose an illegal sentence. I thought I was bound by the score sheet and the lowest permissible prison sentence, since I did not find the basis for a downward departure. As to count 3, then, I will adjudicate Mr. Woodward guilty, and I will impose 25 years in prison with all other terms and conditions that I previously noted. And again, note that Mr. Woodward does have 30 days to appeal the judgment and sentence in this case. If he cannot afford to hire an attorney, as I've already appointed one for him since he's been found indigent, the public defender's been appointed. So I expect that notice of appeal will be filed. And is there anything else the defense would like to address?
No, ma'am, thank you.
Anything else the state would like to address?
No.
All right, thank you all very much. We'll be in recess. Thank you.